The wind came down from the northern hills the way it always did in late autumn, cold, sharp, and carrying the smell of pine and distant snow. Sister Mira felt it before she heard it. She was kneeling in the east garden, her fingers pressed into the cold soil around the base of a dying lavender plant, when the wind shifted, and something inside her chest shifted with it. She pressed her fingers deeper into the earth and held very still. The monastery bell had rung for vespers 3 minutes ago. She had not moved. The other sisters would already be filing into the stone chapel, their brown habits brushing the flagstones, their lips already forming the first words of the evening prayer. Sister Agnes would be holding the candle too close to her chin again, the way she always did, and the wax would drip onto her sleeve, and she would not notice until the prayer was over. Sister Pauline would be standing slightly apart from the others, the way she always stood, as though the space between her body and the nearest person was something she had decided on long ago and never revisited. Mira knew these things the way she knew where every loose stone was in the north corridor, and which step on the chapel stairs creaked in wet weather, and exactly how long the abbess's silence could last before it became a question. She had been here 11 years. She knew the monastery the way a held breath knows the lungs that are holding it. She pulled her hands from the soil and stood. The wind moved again. From the valley, carried up through the pine trees that stood along the monastery's lower wall, came a sound, low, long, rising and then falling, the way a note falls when someone is singing something sad and knows it. Howling. Mira's body answered before her mind could form a single word. Her chin lifted, her shoulders pulled back. Something in the back of her throat moved. Not sound, not quite, but the shape of sound, the preparation for it. Her hands, hanging at her sides, curled slowly into fists. She stood like that for 4 full seconds. Then she swallowed, hard. She straightened her habit, adjusted the white cloth wrapped twice around her head, and walked toward the chapel. Inside, the candles threw long shadows against the stone walls. The sisters stood in 2 rows, and Mira took her place at the end of the left row, beside Sister Agnes, who was already tilting her candle at the wrong angle. Mira did not look at the candle. She looked at the small carved figure of the shepherd on the wall above the altar, and moved her lips with the others, forming the words of the evening prayer. But her ears, tucked carefully beneath the double wrapping of cloth, pressed flat against her head by years of practiced concealment, her ears were still turned toward the valley. The howling came twice more before the prayer ended. Each time, she felt it in her teeth. She had been 4 years old when her mother brought her to the monastery. She remembered very little of that journey. Cold feet, a brown blanket, the sound of horses somewhere behind them in the dark. She remembered her mother's hands, which were always warm, even on the coldest days. She remembered being pressed into the arms of a woman she had never seen before, and her mother saying something to that woman, in a low, careful voice, and then her mother was walking away through the gate, and the gate was closing, and the sound it made was final, in the way that very few sounds are. She had cried for 6 days. The abbess at the time, an old woman named Sister Constance, had sat beside her bed each night and said nothing, just sat there, and after 6 days, Mira had stopped crying, and Sister Constance had handed her a small wooden spoon and told her that the soup needed stirring. That had been 11 years ago. Now she was 15. She could reach the top shelf in the herb room without a stool. She could read Latin well enough to correct Sister Pauline's translations, which she was careful never to do out loud. She could go 3 days on very little sleep and still function, which was useful, because the full moon made sleep impossible. She had never told anyone this. The prayer ended, the candles were extinguished one by one. The sisters moved through the dim chapel in their orderly way, filing out toward the dormitory, their footsteps a soft rhythm on the stone. Mira was the last to leave. She paused at the chapel door and looked back at the carved shepherd on the wall. His stone face was calm. His stone hands were open at his sides. She had prayed to that shepherd every day for 11 years. She had prayed for patience, for stillness, for the ability to be exactly what the monastery needed her to be. She had prayed, in the early years, for her mother to come back. And then, later, she had stopped praying for that, and started praying only for the strength to stop wanting it. The shepherd said nothing. He never did. She found this comforting. She went to bed. The dormitory was long and quiet. The other sisters lay in their narrow beds, their breathing already deepening into sleep. Mira lay on her back and stared at the ceiling and listened to the valley. The howling had stopped. The pine trees below the wall moved in the wind. An owl called from somewhere near the east garden. Far away, on the edge of hearing, something ran through the underbrush at the base of the hill. Something large, moving fast, not frightened. Running. She pressed her hands flat against the mattress and counted her breaths the way the abbess had taught her. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. It was a good technique. It worked, most nights. Tonight it worked too, eventually, and she slept. She dreamed of a fire, which was not unusual. She often dreamed of fire. In the dream, the fire was orange and very large, and it had a sound like tearing fabric, and she was standing at the edge of it, and behind her were people she could not quite see, and in front of her was her mother, walking toward the fire and not stopping. She woke before dawn. This was normal. She always woke before dawn. She lay still for a moment, listening. The dormitory was quiet. The valley was quiet. The wind had dropped during the night, and the monastery sat in a pocket of cool silence that felt, as it always felt in these early morning hours, like the world had paused to take a breath. She got up, wrapped herself in her habit, and went to the kitchen. The kitchen was her favorite place in the early morning. The fire in the big stone hearth had been banked the night before, and she rebuilt it quickly, laying the wood the way the cook, a heavy-handed woman called Sister Bertha, had shown her 5 years ago. You started with the smallest pieces, the ones that caught easily, and you built up from there. You did not rush it. You waited for each layer to catch before you added the next. By the time the fire was going properly, the sky outside the small kitchen window had started to lighten. Mira filled the big pot with water from the well in the courtyard, carried it back and hung it over the fire, and began cutting bread for the morning meal. She was good at bread cutting. She was good at most things that involved her hands, and required focus, and could be done quietly and alone. She was good at weeding, at mending habits, at copying manuscripts in the scriptorium. She was less good at the things that required her to sit still and feel nothing, but she had learned, over 11 years, to perform stillness well enough that no one could see the difference. Sister Bertha came into the kitchen just as Mira was finishing the bread. She was a large woman, with a permanently red face, and a quality of taking up space that Mira had always secretly admired. She moved through the kitchen, the way a ship moved through water, decisively, parting everything around her. "You're early," Sister Bertha said, not looking at her, already reaching for the spice shelf. "I couldn't sleep," Mira said. This was close enough to the truth. "Moon," Sister Bertha said. Mira looked at her. "What?" "Full moon, last night. Always makes people restless." She pulled a bunch of dried sage from the shelf and began stripping the leaves. "Doesn't affect me. Never has. But some people," she shrugged one large shoulder. "Some people feel it." Mira said nothing. She finished the bread. The morning meal passed without incident. The sisters ate in the refectory, the long wooden table running down the center of the room, the windows letting in cold autumn light. The abbess, a woman named Mother Alara, sat at the head of the table. She was not old exactly, but she had the kind of face that had finished changing a long time ago. Sharp cheekbones, gray eyes, hands that were always folded, always still. Mother Alara noticed things. This was the one quality in the abbess that Mira watched carefully, and at all times. The woman had a way of watching the sisters during meals, not obviously, never staring, just a slow, steady attentiveness that missed nothing. Mira had learned early that there was no point in hiding things from Mother Alara. What you could do, if you were careful, was give her things that were true, but not complete, and let her build a picture that was accurate, but not the whole picture. It was a skill, like bread cutting. You did it with your hands and your head and not your heart. This morning, Mother Alara looked at Mira twice. The first time was at the beginning of the meal, a brief glance that Mira met and held for exactly 1 second before looking down at her bowl. The second time was near the end, when Mira set down her spoon slightly too hard, and the sound of it carried in the quiet room, and 2 of the other sisters looked up. Mother Alara said nothing. She returned to her own bowl. After the meal, Mira was assigned to the laundry. This was not her usual task. She was normally in the scriptorium on Tuesdays, but the assignment was changed without explanation, and she went without asking why, because asking why was not something she did. The laundry room was warm from the fire under the washing cauldron. She carried the habit bundles in, sorted them by fabric weight the way she had been taught, and began the work. Her hands moved automatically. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. The howling from the night before had settled in her chest like a stone. She could feel it there, a pressure, a weight, as she scrubbed the fabric against the wooden board. She was not afraid of it. That was the strange thing. She had spent 11 years being afraid of everything inside her that was not what the monastery needed her to be. The ears she concealed, the sharpness of her hearing. The way she sometimes knew, before anyone else did, that rain was coming, or that one of the sisters was sick, or that the wood supply in the east storeroom was running lower than anyone had checked. She was afraid of being found out. She was afraid of the moment when someone's eyes would change as they looked at her. But the howling, she was not afraid of that. She wanted to follow it, which was worse. She pressed the thought flat and scrubbed harder. By midday the laundry was done, hung on the lines in the courtyard, stiffening slightly in the cold air. Mira was washing her hands at the outdoor basin when Sister Pauline appeared at her elbow. Pauline was tall and thin and had a quality of saying things sideways, rarely directly, always with a small preamble that could be abandoned if the response seemed unwelcoming. "You seem distracted at morning prayer," Pauline said, looking at the laundry lines rather than at Mira. "I was tired," Mira said. "The full moon, perhaps." Mira glanced at her. Sister Bertha said the same thing. Pauline smiled, a thin, careful smile. "She says it every month. I've never known her to be wrong about it." She paused. "I heard something last night. From the valley. Did you?" Mira dried her hands on the cloth hanging from the basin post. "I heard the wind." Pauline looked at her for a moment. "Of course," she said, and then she walked away toward the herb garden, her habit brushing the flagstones, her hands clasped behind her back. Mira watched her go. She was not sure if Pauline suspected. She was not sure how long she could manage not to be sure. That evening, she helped Sister Agnes repair the tier in the chapel's hanging cloth, a long piece of dark blue fabric that had split along one seam during the previous week's wind. Agnes sat on one side, and Mira on the other, passing the needle back and forth through the thick fabric, their movements slow and steady. Agnes was old. Her eyes were not good anymore in dim light, and she squinted at each stitch before making it, her face close to the fabric. She had been here longer than anyone else in the monastery, longer even than Mother Alara, and she had a quality of existing so fully inside the present moment that she never seemed to remember yesterday, and never seemed to worry about tomorrow. "You're quick with your stitches," Agnes said, not looking up. "I've done this many times," Mira said. "You have," Agnes agreed. "You've also been here a long time, for someone your age." She pulled the needle through and held the fabric up to the candlelight. "How long now? 11 years?" "Yes." "That's a long time to be the same." Agnes handed the needle back across the fabric. "Most people change several times over in 11 years. Change so much they barely know themselves." She tilted her head, examining the repair. "You've been very still." Mira made her next stitch. "I've tried to be." Agnes lowered the fabric and looked at her, directly, which Agnes rarely did. Her old eyes were clear and very calm. "Trying to be still, and being still, are two different things," she said. "The other is peace." She smiled gently. "I'm not sure you have the second one yet." Mira had no answer for that. She took the needle and finished the row of stitches in silence. Later, in her bed, she lay on her back and listened to the valley again. No howling tonight, just wind, and the distant sound of the river at the bottom of the hill, and the breathing of the sisters around her. She counted her breaths. 4 in, 4 held, 4 out. She was not still. Agnes was right about that. She had never been still. She had been performing stillness, carefully, consistently, for 11 years, and the performance had been good enough, but it was not the same thing. She thought about that as she fell asleep. She thought about the difference between a thing that is true and a thing that is only shaped like truth. She thought about the double wrapping of cloth around her head, always twice, always careful. She thought about the sound she had not made in the garden. She did not dream of fire that night. She dreamed of open ground, a wide, pale field under a full moon, grass that bent in waves. The field was empty and very quiet, and she was running across it, not afraid, not chasing anything, just running. because the ground was there, and her legs could cover it, and the moon was overhead, and everything she had been holding was, for the length of the dream, set down. She woke when the bell rang for lauds, before dawn. She lay still for one more moment, feeling the shape of the dream before it dissolved. Then she got up, wrapped herself in her habit, and pressed the cloth carefully around her head. Both layers. Always twice. She went to the chapel. Outside the narrow windows, the first pale light of morning was touching the tops of the eastern hills. In the valley below, the pine trees stood dark and still. Somewhere down there, among those trees, something had howled the night before. Something that had answered a question she had never let herself ask. She knelt on the cold stone floor of the chapel, and folded her hands, and looked up at the carved shepherd on the wall. She prayed for patience. She prayed for stillness. For the first time in 11 years, she also prayed for something else, though she did not know its name yet, and she would not have been able to say exactly what she was asking for. The shepherd looked back at her, his stone face calm, his stone hands open at his sides. The valley held its breath. And then, far below, just at the edge of hearing, a sound rose from the pine trees, low and long and rising, and Mira's chin lifted, and her throat moved with the shape of an answer she had been holding for 11 years. She pressed her lips together. She swallowed it. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs. The sound from the valley faded. The morning light grew. The chapel was still and cold and quiet. She stayed on her knees until the bell rang for the morning prayer. Then she got up and took her place in the line. They came at the hour when the sky was still dark but the birds had already started. That strange, uncertain time when the night had not quite ended and the day had not quite decided to begin. Mira was at the well in the courtyard, pulling up the morning's first bucket of water, when she heard the horses. Not one or two, many. She set the bucket down on the well's stone rim and stood still, her hands still wrapped around the rope, and listened. The sound was coming from the road that ran along the base of the monastery's outer wall. The eastern road, the one that led up from the valley. Horses moving at a steady pace, not rushing, not slowing. The sound of iron horseshoes on stone road. The sound of equipment. The soft clink and creak of things that soldiers carried. She had never heard soldiers before. She recognized the sound anyway. She left the bucket and walked quickly to the gate. The gate was an old thing, heavy oak with iron hinges, and it had a small slot at eye level that could be slid open to see the road without opening the door. Mira reached it, slid the slot open, and looked through. The road below was full of them, men on horseback, wearing dark cloaks over armor, carrying the red and black standard of the Royal Army. She counted quickly, 25, 30, maybe more. They were not marching in panic or urgency. They moved the way men moved when they had done this many times before, and knew exactly how it ended. At the front, on a dark horse, rode a man in a red sash across his chest. He was not the largest man in the group, but something about the way the others moved in relation to him, giving him slightly more space, watching him without watching him, made clear he was in charge. He had a lean face and careful eyes, and as Mira watched, he looked up at the monastery wall, as though he had known exactly where to look. She stepped back from the slot. Her heart was going fast. She pressed one hand against the wooden gate and breathed. 4 in, 4 held, 4 out, and then walked quickly toward the main building to find Mother Ilara. The abbess was already awake, already dressed, standing at the window of her small office looking out at the eastern wall. When Mira came through the door, she did not turn around. "I heard them," the abbess said. "They carry the king's standard," Mira said. "I know." Mira stood in the doorway. "What do they want?" Mother Ilara turned from the window then, and her face was what it always was, still, composed, revealing nothing it did not intend to reveal. She had lines at the corners of her eyes and gray in her hair, and a quality of knowing things that she had decided long ago not to say out loud. "They will say they want shelter," the abbess said. "They may also want supplies, perhaps information." She picked up her beads from the desk. "Whatever they want, we will give them what we can. We will be courteous and unhurried, and we will not volunteer anything that has not been asked." She said this last part looking directly at Mira. Mira held the abbess's gaze. "Yes, mother." Mother Ilara nodded once. "Wake the others. Tell them to dress and assemble in the main courtyard, calmly." Mira went. By the time the horses reached the gate, the sisters were assembled in 2 rows in the courtyard, their habits straight, their hands folded in front of them. Some of the younger sisters, the girls who had come in the last 2 or 3 years, were pale and standing very close to each other. Sister Bertha looked, as she always looked, like nothing much had the power to alarm her. Sister Agnes stood at the end of the 2nd row with her eyes half closed, her lips moving slightly, as though she were somewhere else entirely. The gate opened. Mother Alara opened it herself, which Mira noted. A small signal, an act of dignity, of control. This was not something being done to them. This was something they were allowing. The man in the red sash rode in first. Behind him came 6 soldiers, dismounting as they passed through the gate, and then more on foot. They arranged themselves along the courtyard walls without being told to, which told Mira that they had done this before. The arranging, the surrounding, the making of space into something that felt smaller than it was. The man in the red sash dismounted. Up close, he was younger than Mira had expected, not much over 30, with dark hair cut short, and eyes that were a precise, almost colorless gray. He wore the red sash over dark leather armor, and carried no obvious weapon, though Mira suspected that was deliberate rather than true. He walked toward Mother Alara with the kind of measured, unhurried stride that said he knew he was in control and did not feel the need to demonstrate it loudly. "Mother Abbess," he said. His voice was steady, not unkind. "My name is Commander Aldrich. I serve the Alpha King." He paused. "We're here on the King's business. I regret the hour and the disruption." "You are welcome to whatever we can provide," Mother Alara said. The word welcome, Mira noticed, was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. Aldrich looked at the rows of sisters. His eyes moved steadily, methodically, the way eyes moved when they were not looking at faces but looking for something specific. Mira stood in the 2nd row, 3 places from the left, and kept her gaze fixed on the middle distance. Her breathing was controlled. The cloth around her head was tight and straight. She had checked it 3 times before coming to the courtyard. "The king has issued a directive regarding individuals of wolf blood lineage," Aldrich said, speaking to Mother Alara, but not quite looking at her. "We have reason to believe several such individuals have sought shelter in religious houses throughout this region. We are required to present all residents for inspection." He paused. "This is not optional, I'm sorry." "Of course," Mother Alara said. Her voice was perfectly smooth. The inspection began. 2 soldiers moved along the 1st row, while Aldrich watched from a position near the center of the courtyard. The soldiers were not rough, they were thorough. They looked at each sister's face, asked her name, her age, her years of residence. One of them wrote things in a small leather book. Mira waited. She could hear everything in this courtyard at a level that no one around her could match. She could hear the soldiers breathing, the particular way each horse shifted its weight, the faint scratch of the pen in the leather book. She could hear her own blood moving, which was not a comfortable thing to hear. She could also hear Aldrich's breathing, which was slower than everyone else's, deliberately slower, controlled. Someone who had learned, the way she had learned, to manage what his body was doing when he needed to think clearly. The soldiers finished the 1st row and moved to the 2nd. They came down the line: Sister Pauline, Sister Bertha, Sister Agnes, Sister Miriam, Sister Cora. Each one answered the questions in their own way. Agnes with mild bewilderment. Bertha with the absolute confidence of someone who had never done anything worth investigating. Then they were in front of Mira. She looked at the soldier, a young man with a serious face and close-cropped red hair. She gave him her name, her age, her years of residence. He wrote in his book. He looked at her face for a long moment, then moved on. She exhaled, slowly, carefully. Then she felt it, a different kind of attention, from a different direction. She did not look, she did not move, but she felt Aldrich's gaze land on her the way a stone lands in still water, not violently, but with a weight that sent something spreading outward from the point of contact. She kept her eyes on the middle distance. Her hands, folded in front of her, did not move. Her breathing did not change. But he had stopped moving. She could hear it, the slight absence of his footsteps, which had been moving slowly across the courtyard. He had stopped. The soldier with the book moved past her to the next sister. The inspection continued. Aldrich did not move for 3 full seconds, and then he did move, and his footsteps carried him to the other side of the courtyard, where he spoke to one of his men, in a low voice, about the grain stores. Mira breathed. The rest of the morning was occupied with the things armies occupied themselves with when they stopped. Horses needed water, the soldiers needed food, the storage rooms needed to be inventoried. Mira was assigned to help carry supplies from the kitchen, which gave her something to do with her hands, and kept her moving through the courtyard where she could hear what was happening. The soldiers were, in the main, respectful. They were tired. She could hear it in the weight of their footsteps and the brevity of their speech. They had been traveling for days. Some of them were older men, with the particular silence of long service. Some were younger, talking in low voices about food and beds, and how much farther the road went before the next town. None of them seemed to find the monastery alarming or remarkable. It was a place to stop, that was all. At midday, the sisters ate in the refectory, with the soldiers seated on benches along the outer wall, their plates full of the bread and soup that the kitchen had produced, in what Mira privately thought was impressive speed for an unexpected army. The meal was quiet and slightly awkward in the way that all meals are, when people who do not know each other are obliged to share a table. Mira sat near the end of the sisters' row and ate her soup and did not look at the opposite wall, where Aldrich sat, apart from his men, eating little, watching the room. She could feel him watching the room. She could feel the specific attention of it, steady, measured, going around the space methodically the way his eyes had gone, along the rows during the inspection. She put another piece of bread in her mouth and looked at her bowl. After the meal, she was in the kitchen scrubbing the big soup pot when she heard footsteps in the doorway. Not Sister Bertha. Wrong weight, wrong pace. She turned. Aldrich stood in the kitchen doorway, alone. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the kitchen, the fire, the hanging herbs, the shelves of preserved goods, as though he were conducting a second inventory. Then he looked at her again. "You're the one who opened the slot in the gate this morning," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. He stepped into the kitchen, which was not a large room, and leaned his shoulder against the doorframe on the far side. He kept a careful distance between them. She noticed this. "How long did you watch us before you told the abbess?" he asked. "Long enough to count 32 mounted men," she said, "and several more on foot." Something in his expression shifted slightly. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of close attention. "Through a slot in a wooden gate," he said. "In the dark." The sun was rising. "The slot is at eye level," he said. "You're not tall enough to see through it, without standing on something." She said nothing. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the fire. "The directive I read out this morning," he said, "is a real directive. Everything I said about it is true." He paused. "Everything except one thing." She waited. "I said we have reason to believe several such individuals have sought shelter in religious houses. That is true of this region in general." He pushed off the doorframe slightly. "But the specific information that brought us to this monastery, on this particular road, at this hour, was more specific than that." She kept her hands on the pot. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," he said. He looked at her without cruelty, without threat, with only that steady, careful attention. "I think you've been doing this for a long time. And I think you're very good at it. Good enough that my soldiers didn't see anything unusual during the inspection." He paused. "But I'm not my soldiers." The kitchen was very quiet. The fire made a small sound. Outside, a horse shifted against its tethering post. Mira set the pot down on the stone floor and straightened. She met his eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. "Nothing happens now," he said. "My men will rest until morning, and then we'll continue south." And you will have until sunrise to decide what you want to do," he said. "You can stay here, and the next unit through will find you. They won't be as observant as I am, but they'll be more thorough with their methods." He said this without any visible pleasure. "Or you can come with us, in which case you'll be going to the capital with the others." "Others," she said. "You're not the only one," he said. "We've brought 12 others from different houses in this region. They're traveling with the unit. They're not in chains." He paused. "They're not being harmed. But they're not free." "No," he said. "They're not free." He looked at her steadily. "Neither are you, really. You've just been choosing which walls to stand inside." She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look without shifting. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Why not just take me with the others and not offer a choice? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because someone told me to offer you a choice. He pushed off the doorframe and moved toward the kitchen exit. Sunrise, he said, and left. Mira stood alone in the kitchen. The fire crackled. The pot sat on the stone floor where she had set it. Outside, she could hear the soldiers settling in for the evening, the horses being groomed, the low murmur of men arranging themselves for sleep. She looked at the fire for a long time. Someone had told him. Those 3 words turned over and over in her mind, slow and heavy. Someone had told him to give her a choice, not just to bring her in, to give her specifically the courtesy of a choice, which meant someone had been watching her long enough to decide she deserved one. She picked up the pot and put it back on the shelf. She went to the herb room and checked the lavender stalks. She went to the scriptorium and put away the manuscript she had been copying the day before, smoothing the page flat, capping the ink well. She went to the laundry room and folded 3 remaining habits that had been left on the line too long and had gone stiff. Then she went to the chapel. It was empty. The candles were cold. The carved shepherd looked down from the stone wall, his hands open, his face giving nothing away. She knelt on the cold floor. She did not pray for patience. She did not pray for stillness. She sat with her hands flat on her thighs and looked at the shepherd and listened to herself, to the thing in her chest that had shifted when the wind changed last night, to the sound she had not made in the garden. Outside, the moon was rising again, full, flooding the valley with white light. She could hear it, she realized. Not the moon itself, you could not hear light, but she could hear what the moonlight stirred, down in the valley, movement, breathing, life that did not hide from what it was. She sat in the chapel for a long time. Then she went to her room and lay down in her narrow bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about walls, about the monastery wall, thick and old, built to keep the outside out, about the wall of cloth around her head, its double wrapping, always tight, about the wall she had built in the back of her throat, where the sounds that wanted to come out were stored and held and pressed flat. She thought about what Aldrich had said. Neither are you, really. You've just been choosing which walls to stand inside. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but she lay very still, and she let herself, for the first time in a long time, feel the weight of what she had been carrying. Not the fear of it, just the weight. The sheer, accumulated heaviness of 11 years of twice-wrapped cloth, and swallowed sounds, and prayers, for a stillness she had never actually reached. It was very heavy. When the bell rang for matins, deep in the night, she was already awake. She dressed in her habit, wrapped the cloth around her head. Once, she paused, her hands still, and then wrapped it twice, because old habits are not ended in one night, and went out into the corridor. The monastery was dark and quiet. The soldiers were sleeping in the courtyard and the refectory. She could hear their breathing, slow, deep, the breathing of tired men. She stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she walked toward the chapel for the night prayer, and as she passed the east garden where the dying lavender plant still leaned against its stake, she stopped for just a second and pressed her hand into the cold earth, and she thought, sunrise. In the chapel, she prayed. For the first time, she was not entirely sure what she was praying for. She did not go to Aldrich before sunrise. She waited until the exact moment of it, the first gray line of light along the eastern ridge, and then she went. He was already in the courtyard. He had not slept. She could tell by the way he stood, his shoulders carrying the particular stillness of a person who has been awake all night, doing something harder than work. He stood near the old stone fountain at the courtyard center, looking at the water, and when she appeared in the doorway, he turned his head, but not his body, as though he had heard her coming from a distance. She crossed the courtyard to him without hurrying. "I'm coming with you," she said. He nodded. No surprise in it. No relief. Just acknowledgement. "All right. I have conditions." He looked at her then, fully, turning from the fountain. "What conditions?" "I will not travel in chains," she said. "I will not be separated from the others you're transporting, and I want to know who told you to give me a choice." He was quiet for a moment. A long enough moment that she counted it, 7 seconds. Then he said, "The first 2 I can give you without reservation. The third one, not yet." Why not yet? Because the person who told me didn't tell me what you could be told or when, he said. I'm not going to decide that for them. She looked at him. He held the look with his clear gray eyes, and nothing moved in his face. She had been around careful people all her life. The abbess was the most careful person she had ever met, and she recognized carefulness. This man was careful in a different way than the abbess was, where Mother Alara was careful in the way of someone protecting something stationary. Aldrich was careful in the way of someone moving through dangerous terrain. He was protecting something too. She just did not know what. Fine, she said. He nodded. We leave at the next bell. Bring what you need. The others travel light. Take only what fits in a single pack. She went back inside. She packed what she had, which was not much. A change of habit, her copy of the small prayer book she had been given in her first year, a cloth pouch of dried lavender from the herb garden that she had taken, without fully deciding to take it, pressing it into the pack in the same unconscious way you press your hand against a bruise. She rolled the pack tightly and sat on the edge of her bed for 1 minute, looking at the narrow room that had been her room for 11 years. The mattress, the shelf with her 3 books, the hook on the wall where her second habit hung, a small window that let in summer, a rectangle of gold in the late afternoon, the stone floor that was cold every morning, without exception, for 11 years. She picked up the pack and left. She did not say goodbye to the room. She did not trust what would happen to her if she did. In the corridor, she nearly walked into Sister Agnes, who was coming from the chapel with a candle in her hand, apparently unaware of the hour, or the army, or the general disruption to the monastery's mourning. Agnes looked at the pack on Mira's shoulder, and at Mira's face, and her old eyes were very clear. Ah, Agnes said. I have to go, Mira said. She did not know what else to say. She had not planned for goodbyes. Agnes looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached out and put one hand briefly against Mira's cheek, a light, dry touch, like the wing of a bird landing and departing in the same motion. You always moved wrong for this place, Agnes said, not unkindly. Too much forward in you, too much east. She lowered her hand. May you go well. Mira opened her mouth, closed it. She squeezed the old woman's hand once and walked away down the corridor. She did not look back. Looking back was the one thing she had decided, in the minute she sat on the edge of her bed, not to do. The group assembled at the gate in the gray morning light, Aldrich, his 30-plus soldiers, their horses, and, Mira discovered when she came through the gate, 12 other people who stood together in a loose, uncertain cluster near the road. They were dressed in ordinary clothes, not habits or uniforms, and they ranged in age from a boy of perhaps 11 to a woman of late middle age. They looked at each other, and at the soldiers, and at the road with the particular expression of people who were still working out what was happening to them. One of them looked at Mira. She was a girl about Mira's age, 15 or 16, with a wide, freckled face and dark red hair cut short. She was wearing a coat that was slightly too large for her, and she was standing with her arms crossed tight over her chest, in the way that said cold, or afraid, or both. When Mira came through the gate with her pack, the girl's eyes found her immediately, which told Mira something about the girl's hearing. Mira walked to the cluster and stood near the girl. They did not speak, but the girl uncrossed one arm and let it hang at her side, which was, in its way, a form of communication. Her name, Mira learned later that morning on the road, was Clara. She was from a river village 3 days south of the monastery, and she had been found at a weaver's workshop where she had been working for 2 years. She had red ears, not just red hair, but ears that were slightly pointed and covered in fine red fur that she usually hid under her hair, and the fur, in the morning cold, was standing slightly on end, the way an animal's fur does when it is cold or alert. Clara told Mira this in a matter-of-fact voice, which Mira respected. There was no drama in Clara's explanation. She simply told it. She was what she was. She had been hiding it. She had been found. And here she was. The freckled face was composed. The voice was steady. And only the very tight way she held her coat told the rest. What about you? Clara asked. Ears, Mira said. Clara looked at the cloth around Mira's head. How long? 11 years. Clara's eyes widened slightly. Since you were 4. There was a silence. Clara looked back at the road ahead, where Aldrich rode at the column's front, his red sash visible from a distance. Do you know where they're taking us? The capital, Mira said. The king wants to see us? Apparently. Clara thought about this for a moment. My grandmother used to say the king hunted our kind, she said. Mine too, Mira said. Your grandmother? I don't remember my grandmother, Mira said, but the abbess used to say it. Not directly. She would say the world outside the walls was dangerous for people who were different, and she would look at me when she said it in a way that was as direct as she ever was about anything. Clara looked at her sideways. And you trusted her? Mira considered this. She had been turning it over since the night before, since Aldrich's 3 words in the kitchen doorway. She kept me for 11 years, Mira said finally. That's its own kind of answer. The road descended from the monastery hill through pine forest, then opened into the valley that Mira had been able to hear but never see. She looked at it as they rode. She had been given a quiet, brown horse, whose name she was told was Barley, which seemed appropriate, and she tried to match what she was seeing to what she had heard over 11 years. The river was lower than she had imagined it, running gray between flat stones. The pine trees on the lower slopes were older than they had sounded in the wind. The valley was bigger, the sky above it wider. She looked at it and felt nothing she expected to feel. She had thought there would be a sense of expansion, of something released. Instead, she felt exposed, not afraid, but bare, like a room whose furniture has been moved and the floor left showing where the table always stood. By midday, they had descended fully into the valley and were moving along the main road south, which was wide and well-maintained with stone-laid edges. Other travelers were on it, merchants with wagons, a family moving their household goods on a cart, a pair of men on horseback who glanced at the army column and moved to the road's edge without being asked. Mira watched the world move past her. It was the most of the outside world she had seen since she was 4 years old, and it came at her in pieces that she had to assemble as she went. The color of the merchant's wagon, the sound of the cart wheels on stone, the smell of wood smoke from a farmhouse set back from the road, the particular quality of light in open country, as opposed to the enclosed light of monastery courtyards. She filed it all away. She was good at filing things away. Clara rode beside her and they talked intermittently, about small things, about the road, about how long the journey would take. Around them, the other 12 moved in their own silences. The soldiers did not press them into formation or hurry them. The pace was steady. Near the front, Aldrich rode without looking back, but Mira was aware of him the way she was aware of any unusual thing in her environment, not with anxiety, but with the particular attention she gave to things she had not yet fully understood. He had called her by name in the kitchen. She had not given her name to him before that moment. She had given it to the soldier with the leather book, but Aldrich had been on the other side of the courtyard. He should not have been able to hear it. She turned this over throughout the afternoon, the way she had turned the abbess's silence over in her mind for years. He should not have been able to hear it, at that distance, in that courtyard, with 30 people's voices and horses and footsteps filling the air. Unless... She looked at the back of his head, at the short dark hair and the straight line of his shoulders, at the red sash that he wore now as a simple identifier, not as something decorative. Unless he had heard it clearly, the way she would have heard it clearly, from across a full courtyard, through the noise of 30 soldiers. She filed this away too. That evening, they stopped at an inn in a river town, a large, prosperous place with a wide front room and a courtyard big enough for the horses. The soldiers took over the front room and most of the courtyard. The 13 of them, Mira, Clara, and the others, were given a room at the back of the building, which was warm from the kitchen wall that backed against it, and which held 4 beds and several pallets on the floor. They arranged themselves without much discussion. The youngest one, the boy of 11 whose name was Owen, and who had barely spoken since the gate, took one of the beds and was asleep before the candle was even lit. An older man named Harold, who had a mechanic's hands and had told Mira over dinner that he worked at a mill, which explained how he had hidden what he was in the loud, vibrating environment of a mill house, sat against the wall with his eyes closed, but his face too tense for sleep. Mira sat near the window. Clara sat beside her. "You're thinking about something," Clara said. "I'm usually thinking about something," Mira said. "This is different. You have that look." Clara paused, then said, "The millman has that look too. When he thinks no one is watching him, he gets that look." "What look?" "Like you're adding something up," Clara said. "Like you're not sure the numbers are working the way they should." Mira was quiet. Outside the window, she could hear the river. The same river she had heard from the valley for 11 years, but now from ground level, with the full weight of it close and real. It sounded different here, heavier, more certain of where it was going. "Commander Aldrich," Mira said. Clara raised her eyebrows slightly. "He knew my name," Mira said. "He should not have been able to hear it, not from where he was standing during the inspection." Clara looked at her, a long, thoughtful look. "You think he's—" "I think he might be," Mira said. "And if he is, and he's working openly for the king, then the king's relationship to our kind is more complicated than my grandmother's stories made it." She felt strange saying my grandmother's stories. She had never met her grandmother. She did not know her grandmother's name. She was using the shape of the phrase to stand in for something she did not have the real words for. "Or," Clara said, "the king found that the best way to catch us is to use someone who could actually find us." "Yes," Mira said, "that too." They sat with both possibilities, the way you sit with a weight that has been placed on you before you know if it is a burden or a counterbalance. Later, when the candles were out and the others were sleeping, Mira lay on her pallet and looked at the ceiling of the room and listened to the river. The river moved without hesitation. It was going somewhere, and it knew where. It did not wrap itself in cloth. It did not swallow its own sound. She pressed the back of her hand against her forehead and thought about the capital. She had never seen it. She did not know what it looked like or what it meant, arriving there as she was arriving. Not a prisoner, not free, something in between that did not have a clean name. She thought about Aldrich's words in the kitchen. "You can stay here, and the next unit through will find you." She thought about what he had meant by methods. She thought about her mother, which she did not do often, because she had learned a long time ago that thinking about her mother was like pressing on a bruise. It confirmed the bruise was there, but did nothing useful about it. She thought about the choice she had made, the fact that she had made it. Walked through the gate, packed her 3 items, refused to look back. That was not nothing. After 11 years of staying, she had walked out. Not forced, not dragged. She had decided, in the dark hour between Aldrich's words and the sunrise, that the life she was living was not the whole of what was available to her. That was not nothing. She fell asleep with the river in her ears, and she did not dream of fire, and she did not dream of the open field. She dreamed of a road, gray stone, stretching south, and the morning light coming level across it, and herself moving along it. Not slowly, not fearfully, just moving, one step and then another, the pack on her back not heavy at all. She woke once in the night when Clara turned over on the pallet beside her, and she lay still for a moment in the dark, listening. 11 breaths in the room, each one a different weight and rhythm. The boy Owen, light and fast. Harold, heavier. Clara, slow and deliberate even in sleep. Outside, the river, the soldiers on watch, a dog barking somewhere in the town. She counted them all, the way she always counted things, and then she closed her eyes and slept again. In the morning, they were back on the road before the sun had fully cleared the eastern ridge. Aldrich was already mounted when they came into the courtyard, already turned toward the south, already going. Mira saddled Barley without help. She had learned quickly the evening before. Horses were, at their base, a straightforward thing if you listened to what they were telling you, and pulled herself up, and looked south along the road. Ahead, the road went over a low rise, and then descended into a long river valley that ran, she had been told, all the way to the capital, 2 days' ride away. The valley was beginning to fill with morning mist, and the road ran down into it and disappeared. She looked at that disappearing road for a moment. Then she touched her heels to Barley's sides and rode. Behind her, the monastery hill was already behind a bend in the road. She could not see it. She did not turn to look. Ahead, Aldrich's red sash was visible at the front of the column, bright against the gray morning. He was not looking back either. They had that in common, at least. They rode into the mist, and the valley swallowed them, and the road kept going south. The road south was 2 days of gray sky and cold air, and the steady sound of hooves on stone. Mira rode mostly in silence. Clara rode beside her and filled the silence with observations about the countryside, the shape of the hills, the color of the farmhouses, the way the river on their right changed character as they moved further south, growing wider and slower and darker. as though it were tired from its journey and settling into its older, heavier self. Mira listened and said little, and watched the world. She realized on the first afternoon, hungry for it, in a way she had not known she was hungry. Not the world in general. She had not been dreaming of cities or crowds, or the noise of marketplaces, but the specific physical fact of horizons, the plain and available reality of sky, that went somewhere, instead of stopping at a wall. The fields along the road, already harvested, brown and broad, and extending further than she could measure. She looked at all of it with the careful, patient attention she had learned to give to manuscripts in the scriptorium, and she did not try to feel anything about it. She just looked. The others traveled in their different ways. Owen, the 11-year-old, had attached himself to one of the younger soldiers, a broad-shouldered young man named Pete, who spoke to the boy in the comfortable way of an older brother, pointing out landmarks and explaining things about the road with the slightly inflated authority of someone who had made this journey 3 times. Harold, the millman, rode steadily and quietly, his eyes on the middle distance. The others, a set of people whose names Mira was slowly gathering, one conversation at a time, arranged themselves in patterns that told her things about them: who was afraid and performing confidence, who was genuinely calm, who was watching the soldiers with the particular attention of someone calculating odds. She was doing the last thing too, though she hoped it was less visible on her face. Aldrich rode at the front most of the time, but on the afternoon of the first day he fell back along the column and rode for a while beside the group. Not beside any one person, alongside the cluster of them, at a parallel distance that made it an observation rather than a conversation. Mira watched him from her peripheral vision. He was watching Harold. Harold, for his part, was looking at the road ahead and giving no indication he noticed. But his hands on the reins had tightened when Aldrich's horse drew level. After perhaps a quarter of an hour, Aldrich moved back to the front of the column. "He's watching him," Clara said quietly, from beside Mira. "Yes," Mira said. "You think Harold is worrying him?" Mira thought about Harold's millhouse, the years of working in noise and machinery and dust, the careful way he held his knowledge. "I think Harold is deciding something," she said. "I think Aldrich can see that. And I think Aldrich is deciding whether to let him decide it or to preempt it." Clara was quiet for a moment. "You're good at this." "Good at what?" "Watching people," Clara said. "Reading them. Most people don't do it that precisely." Mira said nothing. She had learned to do it in the monastery, where the social world was small and dense and every shift in someone's manner had to be interpreted carefully, where what people said and what they meant were rarely exactly the same thing, not because anyone was dishonest, but because meaning was often too large for the exact words available. That night they stopped at a second inn, smaller than the first, and Mira found herself at a table in the corner of the dining room, across from a woman who had not spoken to anyone since they left the monastery. The woman was perhaps 40, with dark hair going gray at the temples and hands that shook slightly when she held anything: a cup, a spoon, the small parcel she kept beside her at all times. She had told the leather book soldier her name was Nora, and that was the last thing Mira had heard her say. Mira did not try to start a conversation. She ate her food and listened to the room. After a while, Nora said without looking up from her bowl, "The parcel is my son's things." Mira waited. "He died 3 months ago," Nora said. "He was 7. His ears came through when he was 5, and I hid them for 2 years. And then he got sick from something that had nothing to do with what he was, and he died." She set her spoon down. "I kept his things because I didn't know what else to keep." Mira looked at the parcel, cloth-wrapped, tied with a piece of dark cord, small enough to hold in one hand. "I'm sorry," she said. She did not say it the way people sometimes said it, as a formality, or a bridge to something else. She said it, and let it stand on its own. Nora picked her spoon back up. "They found me because of his things," she said. "There were toys in the parcel. They had marks on them, claw marks, from when he was still figuring out how to keep them in. The soldier saw them." She stirred her bowl without eating. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." "You can stop," Mira said. "I know," Nora said. She did not stop. "I thought I was going to be a prisoner. I thought they would take the parcel." She looked up for the first time, directly at Mira. Her eyes were dry. She was not in the place where tears were, Mira thought. She was in the place that comes after tears, where everything is simply very quiet and very factual. They didn't take it. No, Mira said. Nora looked at the parcel, then at Mira, then at her bowl. She did not speak again that evening, but when the group moved from the dining room to the sleeping quarters, she sat on the pallet beside Mira's, and when Mira woke in the night from a shallow dream she could not remember, Nora was sitting up in the dark, perfectly still, holding the small parcel in both hands. Mira said nothing. She looked at the ceiling for a while, listening to the inn settle around them, and then she slept again. On the second day, the road broadened, and the other traffic on it thickened. Merchants in larger numbers, farm carts, travelers. The country became more settled, farms closer together, more buildings along the road's edge, villages appearing at regular intervals. The air changed too, carrying with it the faint smell of coal smoke and industry that said a large city was somewhere ahead of them. By mid-afternoon, the capital appeared on the horizon. It was bigger than Mira had imagined, which had been foolish of her. She had imagined nothing really, having no frame of reference. It was a city of stone, built on a rise above the river, and it spread across the hillside in layers of walls and rooftops and towers, the whole thing caught in the late afternoon light so that some parts of it were golden, and some were already in shadow. Above the highest wall, visible from the road, flew a flag the size of a sail, red and black, the royal colors. She looked at it, the city, the thing she was being taken to, the thing she had chosen to go toward. She thought about the monastery at this distance. She thought about the chapel, the east garden, the cold corridor where her room had been. She thought about the carved shepherd with his open hands. She thought about that howling in the valley, the night before the army came, the sound she had not made, the answer she had swallowed for 11 years. She thought about her mother walking away through the monastery gate, and the sound the gate made when it closed. She thought, I was placed somewhere safe, and then the safe place was no longer safe, and someone sent someone to give me a choice, and I chose. I walked out of the gate. I packed 3 things. I did not look back. She could work with this. She did not know what it was that she was working with, but she could work with it. The road entered the city through the south gate, a high arch of pale stone with soldiers at either side, who waved Aldrich's column through without slowing. Inside the gate, the road was wider, and the sound was enormous. After 2 days of open country, wheels on cobblestones, voices from open windows and market stalls, the sound of metal from a smithy somewhere to the left, the general organized noise of a large city going about its afternoon. Mira listened to it all at once, and sorted it as fast as she could, pulling out the pieces that were relevant, from the enormous amount that was simply background. She had never heard a city before. It was like being dropped into a fast river. You could swim, but everything was moving, and you had to go with it while also finding where the banks were. Clara beside her had gone slightly pale. It's loud, she said. Yes, Mira said. How do people... Clara stopped, shook her head. How do they stand it? All the time? You get used to it, said Pete, the young soldier from beside Owen. Give it a week. You won't hear most of it. Owen looked at this with the carefully neutral expression of someone who deeply doubted it. They moved through streets that grew narrower and then wider again, passing a market and a square with a dry fountain and several large official-looking buildings whose purpose Mira could not guess at. Eventually they came to a complex of stone buildings behind a second inner wall. Not the royal palace, she could tell that much, but something adjacent to it. A receiving compound, perhaps. A place where things were processed before they went further. They dismounted in the compound's courtyard. Grooms appeared and took the horses. Soldiers dispersed to other duties. And for the first time since the monastery gate, the 13 of them were left standing together, in a space without the column arranged around them, just themselves, and 4 guards at the courtyard's perimeter, and the sound of the city over the wall. Aldrich stood before them. He looked at the group for a moment, and then he said, You're not prisoners. I told you that on the road and it remains true. You have rooms here, separate rooms, for those of you who want privacy, or shared if you prefer company. You'll be provided for. You're not free to leave the compound until the king has spoken with you individually, which will begin tomorrow. Beyond that, he paused, I am not fully able to tell you what comes next, because I don't have full information myself. But I will tell you that no one in this compound will harm you, and I will tell you that the king's purpose in gathering you here is not what you have probably assumed it to be." Silence. Harold, who had not spoken since the journey began, spoke. "What have we assumed?" "That you're here to be used," Aldrich said, "or stopped, or stored somewhere you can't cause complications." He held Harold's look. "That's not what this is." Harold looked at him with the flat, measuring look of someone who had been given reasons before, and found them unreliable. "What is it then?" "The king will explain," Aldrich said. "Tomorrow." They were shown to their rooms. Mira's was small but not unkind. A bed, a chair, a window, that looked onto an inner courtyard where a single tree had lost most of its leaves, and stood bare and specific against the gray sky. She set her pack down on the bed, and stood at the window and looked at the tree. She was in the capital. She had been here approximately 40 minutes, and she knew nothing more about what was going to happen to her than she had known on the road. She was not afraid. She registered this as a fact about herself, without knowing exactly what to do with it. She had thought she would be afraid, arriving here. Instead, she was something else, alert, attentive, watching, the way she was in the chapel in the early morning, when everything was quiet, and the day had not started yet, and all possibilities were still equally available. She unpacked her 3 items. She set the prayer book on the chair. She put the lavender pouch on the windowsill. She shook out her second habit and hung it on the hook on the wall. Then she sat on the bed and looked at her hands. The backs of her hands were roughened from 11 years of cold water and garden work. The knuckles were slightly enlarged. They were competent hands, useful hands, hands that had learned to do the things that needed doing. She turned them over and looked at the palms. She had never, not once, in 11 years, let herself fully think the thought she was thinking now. She had built a wall in her mind around it and kept it there, plastered over, smooth on the outside. She had been so careful with the wall that she had almost forgotten it was a wall, and had started to think it was just a flat interior surface, a ceiling, or a floor, something structural rather than something constructed. But she was in a different place now, and the wall was thinner at this distance, and the thought came through it anyway. She was not the last one. She had thought, in the way you think something without quite thinking it, that she was alone in this. 11 years inside walls. 11 years of double wrapping. 11 years of swallowed sounds. And in 2 days of road, she had met 12 others. Different ages, different histories, different degrees of concealment. Clara, with her red-furred ears and her matter-of-fact voice. Nora with her parcel and her grief and her dry eyes. Owen, sleeping with the ease of a child who had not yet learned to worry at full capacity. Harold, with his careful stillness and his measuring eyes. 12 others, from one region, in 2 days. If there were 12 in one region in 2 days, then the question of how many there were in total was a question with a very large answer. She sat with that for a while. There was a knock at the door. She stood and opened it. Clara stood in the doorway, her coat still on, her short red hair slightly windblown from the city ride. "I wanted to make sure you weren't." Clara stopped. "You're not spiraling," she said, almost surprised. "No," Mira said. "I was," Clara said. She came in without being asked and sat in the chair. "For about an hour, and then I got tired of it and came to find you." She looked at the bare tree in the courtyard below the window. "It's a strange place to land." "Yes," Mira agreed. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" "The Aldrich? About the king's purpose?" Mira thought about the kitchen in the monastery, the careful distance he had maintained, the offer of a choice, the way he had named things, called them what they were, not what was easier to say. "I think he believes what he's saying," Mira said. "Whether the thing he believes is itself true, I don't know yet." "You say that like there's a difference," Clara said. "There's always a difference," Mira said, "between what someone believes and what is true. The useful question is how large the gap is." Clara thought about this. She stretched her legs out in front of her and looked at her boots, which were dusty from the road. "My grandmother told me the king was our enemy," she said. "She told me this, the way you tell children that fire will burn you, not as something complicated, just as a fact." "Mine too," Mira said. "The abbess. She told me in 100 different ways." "And now?" Mira looked at the bare tree. "Now I'm sitting in a room in the king's compound, waiting to find out if the 100 different ways were right, or if they were the best available truth at the time they were said." She paused. Both can be true. Clara nodded slowly. My grandmother also told me that all rivers run to the sea, she said, which is true. And also, not the most useful piece of navigation information she could have given me. Mira looked at her. For the first time in 2 days, possibly longer, she felt something in her chest that was not the weight of the stone she had been carrying since the valley, something lighter, and slightly surprised at itself. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow we'll know more. Clara stood, stretched, and went to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. The lavender smells good, she said, nodding at the windowsill. I took it from the herb garden, Mira said. I didn't decide to. My hands just did it. Clara smiled. A real smile. Small and quick. Your hands sound sensible, she said, and left. Mira looked at the pouch of lavender on the windowsill. She looked at the tree in the courtyard, bare and certain in the gray evening air. She lay down on the bed without changing her habit. She folded her hands on her chest. She listened to the city. Enormous, layered, full of life, that was entirely unaware of her. And she did not count her breaths, or pray for stillness, or perform anything at all. She simply lay there. The city noise washed over her like the river had washed past her 2 nights ago. Steady, going somewhere, not requiring anything from her except to let it pass. She slept. She did not dream. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she slept from evening through to the pale morning, without any dream at all. When she woke, the sky outside the window was just beginning to lighten. The courtyard tree was a dark shape against a dark blue sky. Below it, very still, a bird sat on the lowest branch and looked at nothing in particular. She watched the bird until the sky grew lighter and the bird flew away. Then she got up, dressed, wrapped the cloth around her head. Once, she paused, as she had the morning she left, and held the decision for a moment, and then wrapped it twice, because today was not the day to change that, and went to the window. The tree stood bare in the courtyard. The morning was cold. The city was beginning its noise. Today the king would speak with her. She breathed in. She breathed out. She was as ready as she knew how to be. They came for her at mid-morning, 2 guards, polite and wordless, who stood at her door and waited for her to follow them, which she did, her hands folded in front of her, her steps unhurried. The compound was larger than she had seen last evening, a series of connected courtyards and buildings, some old stone and some newer construction, set against the older walls, the whole thing layered like a history of decisions made at different times by different people. She catalogued it as she walked. 2 gates she could see, both guarded. The inner wall was higher than the outer. The guards rotated at what sounded like 2-hour intervals from the noise pattern. Not a pattern she needed yet, but a thing she noted anyway, the way she noted all things. The room they brought her to was not what she expected. She had expected something grand and intimidating, the kind of space designed to make the person entering it feel small. High ceilings, a long table, elaborate furnishings, all the architectural machinery of power. She had prepared, without consciously preparing, to walk into a room like that and feel nothing visible. Instead, she was shown into a room the size of the monastery scriptorium. Stone walls, a single large window that looked onto the courtyard tree she had been watching that morning, a desk with papers and maps on it, 2 plain chairs, and a fireplace, with a fire that was doing its actual job, rather than serving as a backdrop. A man sat at the desk. He stood when she came in. King Edrin of the Consolidated Territories was perhaps 35. He was not large, average height, built like someone who spent time working, rather than simply commanding others to work. His hair was dark brown, and he wore it cut simply. His face was neither harsh nor soft. It was the face of someone who had been young, and then something had happened, and they had gone to the place on the other side of that, and they had gotten practical there. He wore no crown. He wore a dark coat with the royal seal at the collar, which was the only thing that said what he was. He looked at her with dark eyes and said, "Please sit down." She sat. He sat. The fire made its small sounds. Outside the window, the bare tree stood. He did not open with pleasantries. She respected this immediately. "I'm going to tell you some things," he said, "and I'm going to ask you to listen without deciding what you think of them until I've finished. I know that's a harder ask than it sounds." "All right," she said. "My name is Edrin. I'm 36 years old. I have ruled these territories for 8 years." He looked at her steadily. 12 years before I took the throne, my father issued an edict ordering the removal of all wolf-blooded individuals from the territory. This edict was, he paused, and his jaw tightened slightly, carried out with a thoroughness that I cannot undo, and will not pretend was anything other than what it was. Mira held very still. I had the edict removed in my first year on the throne, he said. I could not announce it widely, because there are members of my council who would have opposed it, and the political situation at the time was not stable enough to absorb that opposition. I removed it quietly, and I have spent the last 8 years doing other things quietly. Like sending units to collect the people your father displaced, Mira said. Not displaced, he said, and his voice was flat. Killed, or scattered. The people I've been bringing here are the ones who survived by hiding. He picked up a page from the desk, a list of some kind, and set it down again. I know what that costs. I am not under any illusion about what I'm asking you to absorb. She was absorbing it, the word killed, spoken without softening, in the flat voice of someone who had been carrying it for 8 years, and had stopped pretending it had a different weight. Why? She asked. He looked at her. Why did my father? No, she said. Why are you collecting us now? What do you need us for? He was quiet for a moment, a deliberate quiet, not hesitation, but the pause of someone deciding exactly where to begin. Do you know anything about what existed in these territories before recorded history? He said. Before the kingdoms and the boundaries and the roads. I know what's in the texts I copied in the scriptorium, she said, which is what the monastery considered worth preserving, which may or may not overlap with what's true. He almost smiled. It was not quite a smile, but something moved in his face that was adjacent to one. What do the texts say? That the wolf-blooded clans were the first people here, she said. That they held the territory for generations before the settlers came. That the settlers and the clans had an arrangement, a kind of distributed protection. The clans could hear and sense things that ordinary people could not. They knew when storms were coming, when the river would flood, when something in the hills was wrong. In exchange, the settlers built them into the community. She paused. The texts called it a covenant. Yes, he said, that's accurate. He got up from his desk and went to the window, and he looked at the bare tree in the courtyard, with the expression of someone who had looked at that tree many times while thinking about very large problems. The covenant included a second element that most of the surviving texts are vague about, because the people who copied them either didn't understand it or were afraid of it. She waited. The wolf-blooded clans were sensitive to more than weather and flooding, he said. They were sensitive to something older than that, something that predates the settlements, predates the recorded history, something that exists in the deep ground of this territory and periodically becomes active. He turned from the window. The last time it was active was approximately 200 years ago. The wolf-blooded clans spent 3 weeks fighting it back. He paused. It killed half of them. The room was very quiet. What is it? Mira asked. I don't have a good word for it, he said. The oldest texts call it the deep unrest. What I know about it, I know from 3 sources. First, the texts, incomplete and heavily filtered. Second, the records my own geographers and researchers have compiled, also incomplete. Third, he paused, what Commander Aldrich has been able to tell me. She looked at him. Aldrich is wolf-blooded. Yes, the king said. And he works for you. He chose to, the king said. 3 years ago, when I found him and told him what I've just told you. He chose to help me gather others, because he understood what the alternative was. What is the alternative? She said. The deep unrest becomes fully active, without enough wolf-blooded individuals to sense it, read it, and push it back, he said. He looked at her directly. Everyone in this territory dies, not over time, not gradually. All of it, all at once, the way a candle goes out when there is no more air. She sat with this. She turned it over, the way she turned all large things over, methodically, checking each face of it, looking for where it did not hold together, for the seams and weaknesses that would tell her it was not what it claimed to be. The problem was, it held together. The texts she had copied, the fragments and the careful omissions, the places where the scribes had written around something without naming it, they made sense now, arranged this way. The covenant, the protection, the 3 weeks in the records that simply did not appear. A gap between entries dated 200 years apart, as though the people writing the history had looked at that period and decided not to. "You need us to survive," she said. "Yes," he said. "And you're asking us to help a kingdom that killed us." He was very still. "Yes, my king." She stopped. That was not the right word, and they both knew it. "Your predecessor killed my clan," she said. "I was 4 years old. I was placed in a monastery by my mother, because it was the only safe place she could find, and I never saw her again." He said nothing. He did not try to apologize, which she noticed. He stood at the window and let the sentence have its full weight. "I know," he said finally. "I know what was done." "Then you know why this is not a simple thing," she said. "What you're asking." "Yes," he said. "I know exactly what I'm asking." He moved back toward the desk. "I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. I'm asking you to decide whether the reason that I need you, whether the lives of everyone in this territory, matters enough to you to help anyway." He looked at her. "I'm asking you that as directly as I can, because you deserve the direct question." She looked at him for a long moment. He held her gaze. She was looking for the gap between what he believed and what was true, the gap she had identified on the road as the useful question. She looked for it carefully. The gap was not large. That was not the same as there being no gap, but it was not large. "I'm not deciding now," she said. "I'm not asking you to decide now," he said. "I want to talk to the others," she said. "The 12 others. And I want to talk to Aldrich. Not about the mission, not about the unrest. About my mother." She said this and let it sit. "I believe he knows something." The king looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not surprise, but something heavier. Recognition. "I believe he does too," he said. "I'll have him speak with you today, if you're willing." She stood. "I'm willing." She walked to the door and then stopped. "The howling I heard," she said, 2 nights before your army came. It came from the valley." "Yes," he said quietly. She looked at the door for a moment. That was deliberate. "Yes," he said. She let that sit between them. A deliberate sound from the valley, 2 nights before the soldiers arrived. A howl that her body had answered before she could stop it. A sound sent specifically to stir the thing she had been holding for 11 years, and then a choice offered at sunrise, and then a road. "Someone has been watching me for a long time," she said, not a question. "Yes," he said. She left. The guards took her back through the compound, but she asked them to stop in the outer courtyard, and they stopped. She stood in the open air and looked up at the sky, which was the same gray it had been for 3 days, and she breathed. She thought about the howl she had heard in the valley. She thought about the stone she had swallowed in her throat. She thought about her mother's hands, warm on the coldest days. She thought about the abbess's face, watching her across the dinner table, with the attentive, careful eyes that noticed everything and said nothing. Had the abbess known, not just that she existed, not just what she was, but this, the king's purpose, the deep unrest, the gathering? Had the monastery been not just a safe place but a waiting place? She was turning into someone who had too many questions, she thought. She had spent 11 years not asking questions. Now she was unable to stop. She stood in the courtyard until she heard footsteps. Unhurried, controlled, with the particular measured pace she had learned to identify over 2 days of road. She turned. Aldrich stopped a few feet away. He was without the red sash today, just the dark coat, no visible insignia. He looked at her, and then at the courtyard, giving her time to decide how to begin. "You sent the howl," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "Not to frighten me," she said. "To remind me. To wake something up," he said. "That was what I was told to do." "By whom?" He looked at her. She could see him making a decision, a brief, precise calculation behind his gray eyes. Then he said, "Sit down. There's a bench along the east wall. Sit down, and I'll tell you about your mother." The bench was cold stone. She sat. He sat beside her, not too close, leaving the space between them that he had always maintained. The courtyard was quiet. Above them, the bare tree moved slightly in the wind, its branches making the small ticking sounds that bare branches make against the air. "Your mother's name was Ilara," he said. Mira went very still. "The abbey's name was Ilara. Mother Ilara." The abbess who had taken her in and kept her for 11 years and watched her at dinner with careful gray eyes. "Alara," she said. "Your mother did not die when the purge happened," Aldrich said. "She survived by entering the monastery. She went in ahead of you, years ahead of you, and built a life there. A disguised life. And when the danger came to your clan, she brought you to the one place she knew was safe, because she had already made it safe." Mira's hands, on her knees, pressed flat. "The abbess," she said. "Is your mother," Aldrich said. "Yes." She sat with this. The courtyard was cold. The tree moved. The city went on being enormous beyond the wall. She sat with it for a long time, not trying to feel something about it, not resisting feeling something about it. Just letting it be what it was. Her mother had walked away through the gate. She had watched her mother walk away through the gate, and that had been the worst moment of her life, the founding stone of all the grief she had carried since. Her mother walking away, the gate closing, the final sound of it. Her mother had been inside the gate. Every Vespers prayer, every cold morning in the lavender garden, every meal at the long table under those watching gray eyes. For 11 years, in the same building, walking the same corridors, saying the same prayers. She had never been left. She had been kept in the safest possible way, by the person most invested in her safety, at an arm's length that looked like distance but was not distance. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs and held them there. "The howling in the valley," she said finally. That was also her instruction. "Yes," Aldrich said. "She told me, when it's time, give her the sound she's been waiting for, then give her a choice." He paused. "She said you would choose right. She said she had been watching you make small choices for 11 years, and you always chose right, even when it cost you something." Mira looked at the tree. She was not going to let what she was feeling show in her face. She had 11 years of practice at this, but her hands, on her thighs, were not entirely flat. "Why didn't she tell me herself?" she said. "She tried," Aldrich said. "She couldn't find the moment that was enough. She knew that once she told you, everything would change, and she wasn't sure you were ready. She wasn't sure," he paused, "whether telling you would give you back something or take something away from you." "Both," Mira said. "Obviously both." "Yes," he said. "Obviously." They sat in the cold courtyard. The tree moved. Somewhere in the city, a bell rang the hour. "Does she know I'm here?" Mira asked. "Yes," he said. "She sent a message this morning." "What did it say?" Aldrich reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, small and close written. He held it out. She took it. She looked at it for a moment without opening it. The paper was thin, the kind used for letters intended to travel light. The fold was precise and tight, the way the abbess's hands were precise and tight in everything they did. She put it in her pocket without reading it. "I need more time," she said. "The king hasn't given a deadline," Aldrich said. "I know." She stood up from the cold bench. "I'm not saying that for him. I'm saying it for myself." She looked at the tree one more time. "I've been doing things slowly and carefully for a long time. I'm not going to stop now." Aldrich stood. He looked at her with the clear gray eyes and said nothing, which was, she had come to understand, the way he expressed a great deal. She walked back toward the building. She was going to need the afternoon. She was going to need the letter, and the afternoon, and probably the evening too. She had just learned that the woman who had kept her for 11 years and the woman who had sent her away were the same woman, that the gate closing and the gate being watched over from the inside were the same event. She was going to need time with that. But at the back of her mind, already settling into place, was something she had not expected to feel so quickly, an orientation, a sense of direction, not decided yet, not committed, but facing somewhere. South was behind her now. She was already here. Whatever came next came from here. She walked inside, out of the cold. She read the letter at dusk, sitting on the floor of her room, with her back against the bed, and the letter held close to the small lamp on the windowsill. The bare tree outside the window was invisible now, swallowed by the dark, and the city had shifted into its evening self, slightly quieter, slightly warmer in tone, the sounds of cooking and conversation replacing the sounds of commerce. Her mother wrote in the same careful, precise hand Mira had copied manuscripts with for years. The abbess's handwriting was the standard she had learned to match. She stared at the letter for a moment before reading it, just at the handwriting itself, and felt something wordless move through her. Then she read. Her mother did not begin with an apology, which Mira had half expected and would have found difficult to receive. She began with a fact. I have watched you become someone I could not have made you, and I have not always known whether to be proud or ashamed of what the watching cost. She read the whole letter once, and then she put it down on her knee and looked at the dark window. Then she picked it up and read it again. It was not a long letter. It said, in its precise and careful way, several things. That the choice to enter the monastery first, months before the danger reached the clan, was made before Mira was born. That the arrangement with the old abbess, Sister Constance, was a thing Alara had prepared as a kind of insurance against a world that was becoming less safe. That she had not believed the danger would arrive as fast as it did. That when it came, and she handed Mira to herself, to Constance, who would pass care to the disguised Alara within the year, she had done the only thing available to her, and known it was not enough, and done it anyway. It said, I tried to find the right moment every year you were there. There were mornings in the scriptorium when I thought I could do it. There were evenings in the chapel, when your face was so closed against the world that I knew it was not the right time. I kept waiting for a time when the information would not break something in you before you had the ground to stand on. It said, I think I waited too long, but I also think you had to be exactly who you are before you could receive this, and you could not have been that person any earlier. And at the end, one sentence. When you are ready, I am coming. She folded the letter and held it in both hands. She sat like that until the lamp burned low. Then she got up, put the letter in her pack with the prayer book and the lavender, and went to find Clara. Clara was in the room across the corridor, awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed with a piece of string she was apparently tying into an elaborate knot, and then untying and tying again. She looked up when Mira came in. You look like you've been told a lot of things, Clara said. Yes, Mira said. She sat on the edge of Clara's bed. What do you know about the deep unrest? Clara's hands stilled on the string. She looked at Mira carefully. The king told you. Yes. He told Harold and me this afternoon, Clara said. Separately. I imagine he's telling everyone. She set the string down. My grandmother talked about it, not by name, not in those words. She called it the ground sickness. She said the old people in the clan used to take turns sleeping on the bare earth every winter, listening for it. Could they hear it? Mira asked. She said they could feel it, Clara said. She said it was like the earth breathing too slow, like something very large was breathing once a week instead of once a minute, and you could feel when the rhythm changed. She was quiet for a moment. She said when the rhythm changed, you had a short time to push back. What does pushing back look like? Clara looked at her. She didn't say. She said the old people knew how, and the knowledge was in the bones, not the words, and that's why it mattered so much that there were enough of them. She picked up the string again and held it between her fingers. Enough of us. Mira looked at the knot in the string. Harold's decided, she said. It was not a question. She had seen it in his face that afternoon in the courtyard. The particular quality of stillness that was not uncertainty but resolution. Yes, Clara said. He told the king this afternoon that he would stay. He said he'd been hiding in a mill house for 9 years, and he was tired of hiding. She paused. He also said he wanted compensation, which I thought was the most sensible thing anyone has said in 2 days. Mira almost smiled. Nora? She asked. Clara was quiet for a moment. Nora hasn't decided. I don't think Nora is in a place where deciding feels real yet. She looked down at the string. I can't tell if the grief is, if it's something she's going to come through, or if it's where she's going to stay. Mira thought of Nora's dry eyes and the way she had held the parcel in the dark. Owen? She asked. Owen, Clara said, and her voice changed, softer, slightly careful. Owen doesn't really have a decision to make. He's 11, and he was hiding alone in a river town, and his options are very limited, and he knows it. He's been practical about it in a way that makes me want to. She stopped. He's going to be all right, she said finally. I'm going to make sure he's all right. Mira looked at her. Clara was 16, slightly too large coat, red furred ears, that she was currently letting show because they were indoors, and it was her room. and this was apparently a decision she had made somewhere on the road. She had known this girl for 2 days, and Mira trusted her judgment about Owen more than she trusted almost any assessment she had heard from adults in 11 years. "What about you?" Mira asked. Clara turned the string over in her fingers. "I'm staying," she said. "I decided somewhere on the road. I didn't know I had decided until I heard myself telling Harold, but I had." She looked up. "You?" "I haven't decided," Mira said. "I'm getting close to it." "What's holding it?" "Something I'm still turning over," Mira said. And then, because Clara was not someone who required things to be managed or simplified, "I found out today that the abbess is my mother. My actual mother. She survived the purge by entering the monastery before the danger reached us. She's been watching me for 11 years, while also being the person who kept me safe." Clara stared at her. "It's a great deal to hold," Mira said. "That is," Clara stopped. "Yes, that is a great deal to hold." She looked at Mira with the steady, direct attention she brought to everything. "Are you all right?" "I think so," Mira said. "I don't know what all right means in this situation. I'm functional. I can think. I'm not—" She looked for the word. "Undone." "That's something," Clara said. "Yes," Mira agreed. She sat on the edge of Clara's bed, and they were quiet together for a while. The city made its sounds outside. The lamp between them was low and warm. Clara worked her string into a new knot and held it up to the light, then let it fall. "The ground sickness," Clara said eventually. "When my grandmother talked about it, she used to say that the wolf blood people didn't fight it because they wanted to. She said they fought it because they were the only ones who could, because they were built with the specific frequency needed to push back." She turned the string over. "She said it was like being born with a particular key that fit only one lock in the whole world. You didn't choose the key, but if the lock was there, and you were there, walking away from it was its own kind of choice." Mira looked at the lamp. She was built with a particular key. She had spent 11 years stuffing the key under the double wrapping of cloth around her head, and pretending it was just a rock in her pocket, heavy and useless. But it was still the key. "I'm going to sleep," she said. She stood up. "Good idea," Clara said. She was already lying back against her pillow. "Things are usually clearer in the morning." "Not in my experience," Mira said, and went back to her room. She slept, and in the morning things were not clearer exactly, but they were more settled. The quality of the decision had changed from active turning to something quieter and more finished. She dressed and went down to the morning meal. The compound's dining room was long and plain, with a fire at one end and tables running the length of it. She found the others already there, Harold with a plate and the focused expression of a man who had made his decision and was now thinking about breakfast. Owen beside Pete, the young soldier, apparently in the middle of a discussion about horses. Nora at the far end, alone, her parcel on the table beside her plate, eating in the careful, automatic way of someone keeping their body going while their mind was somewhere else entirely. She sat beside Nora. Nora looked at her. Not with surprise. With the flat recognition of someone who has already been visited and is not unwelcoming of the next visit. "I'm staying," Mira said. Simply. Without preamble, the way the king had spoken to her, because Nora was not someone who needed softening either. Nora looked at her plate. "Because of what the king told you?" "Partly," Mira said. "Partly for other reasons." "The others?" Nora said. "Most of them are staying." "I know. I don't know if I am," Nora said. She set her fork down. "I don't know what I have left that's worth." She stopped, started again. "What they're asking us to do, the ground sickness, what my son's ears were supposed to be for, eventually, if he'd lived." She pressed her hand flat on the table. "If I stay and fight for something, and it works, what did that cost me? Is that what he was made to lead to? And if I don't stay—" She stopped. Mira waited. "If I don't stay," Nora said, "then I go somewhere. I hide again. And in some number of years the thing in the ground wakes up and everyone dies, including me." She picked up her fork. "So the choice is stay and try, and feel the weight of what it costs to even be here, or go and hide and die eventually anyway." "Yes," Mira said. "That's the choice." Nora looked at her. "You make it sound simple." "I don't think it's simple," Mira said. "I think it's clear. Those aren't the same thing." Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up a piece of bread and ate it with the same careful, automatic focus. She did not say anything else, and Mira did not push her, and they ate in silence until the others began filling in around them. That afternoon, Aldrich gathered the whole group in the compound's largest room, a plain space with chairs arranged in a rough circle and daylight coming through high windows. He stood at the edge of the circle rather than the center of it, which Mira noted, not positioning himself as the authority in the room, positioning himself as one person among others who had more authority than he did over their own situation. "The king has asked me to tell you what I know about the deep unrest," he said, "not what the texts say about it. I can give you references to the texts, and you can read them at your own pace. What I know from having been near it." The room went still. 3 years ago, Aldrich said, "I was in the Northern Territories for a different reason. I was tracking a water problem, a series of river changes that the geographers couldn't explain. I camped one night in the hills above the second river fork, and in the middle of the night I woke up." He paused. "There was nothing to see, no sound, no movement. But I was awake, with the absolute certainty that something below me was doing something, and it was wrong." He looked at the floor for a moment. "I pressed my hands to the ground," he said, "and I felt it, like a very low vibration, not in the ground itself, in something under the ground, something alive, but not alive the way anything I know is alive. Alive in the way a fire is alive, or the way water is alive when it floods, not thinking, not choosing, but not stopped." He looked up. "I felt the rhythm, and the rhythm was wrong. Too slow, and then speeding up, and then too slow again. Like something trying to wake up." "What did you do?" Owen said. Aldrich looked at the boy. "I pushed back," he said simply. "I don't know another word for it. I put my hands on the ground, and I focused on the rhythm, and I pushed. The way you push against a door that's being held from the other side. Not hard enough to force it open, not hard enough to break anything. Just enough to say, 'Not yet.'" "Did it work?" Owen asked. "It slowed," Aldrich said. "The rhythm slowed again. The wrong speeding up stopped." He paused. "I sat there with my hands on the ground until nearly dawn. And then I went to find the king." Nobody spoke for a while. The high windows held pale afternoon light. Outside, the city moved without knowing any of this. "How long?" Harold said. His voice was low and steady. "How long before it tries again?" "The geographers and the old records together suggest." Aldrich paused. "Months, not years. The rhythm I felt 3 years ago has been changing faster than the historical pattern. Something is accelerating it." "What's accelerating it?" Clara asked. "We don't know," Aldrich said. He held her gaze without looking away from the difficulty of it. "We have theories. None of them are confirmed. What we know is that the timing has shortened, which means the window is shorter, which means we need more of us than we originally thought." Mira, who had been sitting with her hands quiet in her lap through all of this, spoke for the first time. "How many more?" Aldrich looked at her. "We have 13 now," he said. "The records suggest the last effective defense used 42. The number sat in the room. 42. 13 now. Months of window. "I have 11 others I know the locations of," Aldrich said. "Aldrich, in the Eastern Territories. Further gathering is possible, but requires time we may not have." Mira looked at the circle of people around her. Harold, his big hands folded. Clara, her red ears fully visible in the afternoon light, her face very still. Owen, who was holding Pete's sleeve, without apparently knowing he was doing it. Nora, at the far edge of the circle, her parcel on her knee, her eyes on Aldrich with an expression that was not fully readable. She looked at each of them in turn. She had spent 11 years building walls. She had been very good at it. The walls had been strong, and her performance of stillness had been convincing, and she had survived. None of it had led to this. She had not been building toward this. She had simply existed, carefully, behind walls, until a sound from a valley cracked the first one, and a choice at sunrise had opened a gate, and a road had led her here to a circle of people who were her kind, and a problem that had her name on it, in the oldest possible way. She had a key that fit a lock. She had spent 11 years carrying it, without knowing what it was. "I'm staying," she said, to the room, to the circle, to no one in particular, and all of them at once. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. Around the circle, one by one, without discussion, without dramatics, people moved their hands, or shifted their weight, or settled slightly in their chairs, in all the small ways that bodies say yes before voices do. Even Nora. She pressed her hand once against the parcel on her knee, and she breathed, and she said nothing at all. But she did not say no. In the room's high windows, the afternoon light held. The cloth came off on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. Not in a moment of decision that had been announced or prepared for. She was standing in the compound's outer courtyard in the mid-afternoon, alone, having come out for air after 3 hours of study, in the records room where she and Clara and Harold had been working through the geographer's documents. Dry, dense texts that explained the deep unrest in the careful language of people who were frightened of what they were writing down and had decided that precision was safer than clarity. She was standing in the courtyard with the bare tree at her back and the cold air on her face, and her hands came up to her head without a decision being made, and they found the ends of the cloth, and they unwrapped it. Both layers, without pausing between them. She stood in the cold afternoon air. The ears came free. They were, she had almost forgotten, large, as wolf-blood ears were, and mobile, and they turned slightly toward the city noise beyond the wall, before she had consciously directed them to. They had been turned toward things all her life. They had just been under cloth. The cold air hit them, and the sensation was like the cold air hitting your face, after being in a warm room for a long time. A sharp, clean, slightly shocking clarity. The world, already loud for her, became more articulate. The city resolved into individual sounds with cleaner edges. The pigeons on the compound wall, the specific voice of the guard at the east gate, the sound of Owen and Pete in the training yard somewhere beyond the inner wall, the particular pattern of Clara's footsteps in the records room above her. She stood in the cold and let the world come in. It was not relief. She had expected relief, or something like it, the release of a long-held breath. What she felt instead was more like the end of numbness, like when a limb that has been held still for too long begins to work again, and the first sensation is not comfort, but a sharp insistence on being felt. She had been under cloth for 11 years. The courtyard tree moved in the wind. Above it, the sky was the pale winter blue that came after days of gray, brittle, clear, very far up. She stood there for several minutes, long enough for the sharpness to ease and the clarity to settle into something she could simply inhabit rather than brace against. Long enough to understand that this was not a temporary state. She was not going to rewrap the cloth and go back to what she had been. She was not sure she could, and she was not sure she wanted to try. The door to the inner courtyard opened and Aldrich came through it. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at her for a moment, at the ears, at the cloth hanging from her hand, and then he nodded once, the way he nodded at information that confirmed something he had already suspected. He came and stood beside her at his customary careful distance. "You've been in the records room," he said. "Yes," she said. "Learn anything useful?" "Several things," she said, "including that the geographers believe the primary sensing location, the area where the unrest is most readable, is approximately 4 miles north of the city. There is an old well there, dry for the last 30 years. The geographers couldn't determine why it went dry." "I know the well," he said. "I think we need to go there," she said, "before anything else. Before more training, before more documents, before the King's planning sessions. I need to feel what we're working with." He was quiet for a moment. "The King may not want—" "I'm not asking the King," she said. She turned to look at him directly. "I'm telling you what I need to do, because you're the one who has felt it already, and you'll know if what I'm sensing is real, or if I'm making it up." He looked at her. The clear gray eyes were, as always, thinking faster than they were showing. "You're not someone who makes things up," he said. "No," she said, "but I might want to. I might be so eager to be useful that I convince myself I feel something I don't." She held his gaze. "I need you there to tell me honestly." He was quiet for another moment. Then, "Tomorrow morning, before the compound wakes. I'll take you there." He went back through the door. She stood in the courtyard until the cold had gone all the way through her coat and her skin, and was sitting in her bones, and then she went in too. That evening, she did not go to the records room or the dining hall. She sat on the floor of her room with her back against the bed and her ears open to the building and the city and everything beyond the walls. She was learning the geography of it, not the streets and the buildings, but the sound geography, the way the city changed texture by time of day, the particular sounds that came from specific directions. It was what she had done in the monastery, mapping the corridors and rooms and rhythms by sound, but on an enormously larger scale. Her ears hurt slightly, not from the cold, from the years of compression. Like any joint or muscle held in one position too long, they ached when asked to move fully. She was patient with this, the way she was patient with everything that asked for patience. She thought about the letter in her pack. "When you are ready, I am coming." She did not know if she was ready. She did not know what ready meant, in this context, for this particular event. She had met her mother every day for 11 years, in the form of the abbess, and she had not known. Everything she thought she knew about those 11 years had changed shape. The memories were the same, but they sat differently now, oriented differently, facing a new direction. She thought about the cold hand on her face, in the corridor, on the morning she left. The lightness of it, like a wing landing and departing. That was not the hand of an abbess. That was not the hand of a woman managing the departure of a junior resident. That was a mother touching her child's face, in a corridor, that she could not say what she needed to say in. In the last moment she was sure she would have. Mira pressed the back of her own hand against her cheek. She did not cry. She had learned, over 11 years, to process grief in a much slower and more internal way than crying aloud. And the grief she was carrying now was large enough that she was not sure she would know where to start if she tried. It was not grief exactly. It was something broader than grief. Something that contained grief, but also contained things that were not grief. Things that were closer to awe, or to the sensation of a picture finally large enough to see what it was a picture of. She sat with it until late, and then she lay down and slept. In the morning she woke before the compound bell, dressed quickly, did not reach for the cloth on the bedside table, and went downstairs. Aldrich was in the outer courtyard, already mounted, with a second horse, a different animal than Barley, a dark gray mare that was alert and still, waiting at the post. He said nothing when she appeared. He handed her the reins. They rode out of the compound through the east gate, which the guard opened without question. Aldrich had clearly prepared this. They rode through the early morning city, streets nearly empty, the smell of bread and coal fires already in the air, the sky above the rooftops turning from dark blue to the particular pale gray that preceded dawn. Mira rode with her ears open and the cold air against them, and said nothing. Through the north gate, and then on a road that left the city behind within a quarter mile, and became a track running between fields, winter fields, empty and flat, with the occasional skeleton of a hedgerow between them. The track ran north and slightly east, and after perhaps half an hour of riding, it dipped down into a hollow where a ring of old stones marked the site of the dry well. They dismounted and tied the horses to the stones. Mira walked to the well's edge and looked down into it. It was not deep, perhaps 20 feet. The stones of its lining were old, mortared in a style she did not recognize, and at the bottom was not dirt or leaves but bare stone. It had not simply dried up, something had taken the water. She put her hand on the well's stone rim. She felt it immediately. It was not subtle. She had expected something subtle. A faint vibration, a change in temperature, something that she might dismiss as imagination if she were not paying close attention. It was not that. It was unmistakable. A slow, deep pulse coming up through the stone and into her palm. Not like a heartbeat, but like the sound a very large bell makes after it has been struck. A sound that is mostly feeling, that you perceive in your chest and your bones more than your ears. That quality, but from below, from the ground, from something that was not the well, but was using the well as a kind of channel. She gripped the stone rim tighter and listened. The pulse was irregular. Not random. There was a pattern, a long underlying pattern. But within the pattern, there were moments of hesitation, almost like a stumble, and after the hesitation, the pulse came back faster and then slowed again, as though something very old was in the process of waking up from a very long sleep and having the specific confusion of a body that has not moved in a long time trying to remember what movement felt like. She was aware of Aldrich standing 4 feet behind her. She was aware of the cold. She was aware of the horses and the empty fields and the pale morning sky. She breathed in and let the pulse come through her hand and up her arm, and she did not resist it or analyze it. She simply felt it. And then, without deciding to, She pushed. Not hard. Not with force. The way you push gently against someone who is asleep and having a difficult dream, not to wake them, not to stop them, just to say, I am here, there is another world, you are not alone in this. The pulse, beneath her hand, slowed. Just slightly, not a lot, but measurably, definitely, in a way she felt as clearly as she felt the cold. It slowed. She held her hand on the stone for another minute, feeling the new rhythm, and then she stepped back. She turned to Aldrich. He was watching her with his still face and his gray eyes. It slowed, he said. It was not a question. Yes, she said. I felt it too. He looked at the well. When I pushed 3 years ago, alone, it took me most of a night to slow it that much. She looked at her hand. Then we need more people here, she said. Yes, he said, urgently. She looked at the sky. The pale gray had turned to white. Not clouds, just the particular winter white that came before real daylight. A bird crossed it, high up, going south. When you pressed your hands to the ground 3 years ago, she said, did you know what you were doing? Did you know how? No, he said. I did it the way you just did it, without knowing, because there was no other option. Is that enough? She said. Just doing it? Without understanding the mechanism? It's what we have, he said. She looked at the well. The stone rim was dark with morning damp. The old mortar between the stones had been repaired at some point. She could see the different color of it in one section, newer than the rest. Someone had maintained this well. Not recently, but not so long ago either. Decades, not centuries. People knew about this, she said. People who were not wolf-blooded. Someone maintained this well, after it went dry, for a reason. Aldrich looked at where she was looking. The records might say something about that. I'll look, she said, this afternoon. She turned from the well and walked back to the gray mare, and she was different from the person who had ridden up the track an hour ago. Not different in a way that showed in her face or her posture. But something had been confirmed that needed confirming, and now that it was confirmed, the direction she had been facing had a floor under it, which it had not had before. She mounted the mare. Aldrich mounted his horse. One more thing, she said, before they turned back toward the city. He waited. My mother's letter said she was coming, Mira said. Do you know when? Within the week, he said. She sent word the same day you arrived. She looked at the well one more time. The sun was beginning to come, level and low, from the east, and it lit the old stones orange for a moment. Warm and old and full of the patience of things that have waited a long time. Good, she said. We'll need her. They rode back toward the city as the day fully arrived around them. The fields were still empty. The track was quiet. Behind them, in the hollow with the ring of old stones, the well sat in the morning light, and the ground beneath it breathed its slow, wrong-paced breath, doing what it had been doing for 200 years, waiting for someone to come. That afternoon, she found the record she was looking for. It was in a thin ledger, filed in the third cabinet of the geographer's archive, between 2 thicker books on river behavior, easily missed, labeled in a small hand as maintenance accounts, North Wells, 1340 to 1420. She pulled it out and set it on the table and opened it to the middle. The accounts were ordinary, materials, labor, dates of inspection, amounts paid. But threaded through them, appearing every several years in the same small hand, were brief notes, well holds. Visited, checked, still. The last note was dated 80 years ago. A single word, changed. After that, nothing. She sat with the ledger in her hands, and felt the weight of 80 years of silence. Someone had watched the well. Someone who was not wolf-blooded. The name at the top of the ledger was a man called Foster Wells. A perfectly ordinary name belonging to a perfectly ordinary geographer, had understood what the well was for, and had kept an eye on it, until 80 years ago, when something changed. She turned back to the first page of the ledger and read forward, and what she found was not in the notes. It was in the dates of the visits. They had started widely spaced. Every 4 or 5 years, someone went to check the well, then every 2 years, then every year, and in the last decade of the ledger, every season. The visits had been accelerating, exactly the way Aldrich said the pulse was accelerating now. She put the ledger in her lap and looked at the ceiling. 80 years ago, the last person who was watching the well had written one word, changed, and then stopped writing. Not because the watching had stopped, because something had changed the watcher. She looked at the word again, changed. Not left, not done, changed. She stood up and took the ledger downstairs and knocked on the door of the room where Aldrich kept his maps. He opened the door and looked at her, and then at the ledger. "I need you to look at this," she said, "and I need you to tell me who Foster Wells was." He looked at the name on the ledger cover for a moment. "I don't know," he said, "but I know who might." He stepped aside to let her in. "Come in. I'll send for him." She came in. She set the ledger on his table next to the maps of the Northern Territories, and she looked at the place where the dry well was marked as a small circle in the geographer's notation, and she thought, "We have months." Maybe, she thought, 13 people. She thought, 1 week. Then she sat down and opened the ledger again and read it from the beginning, and the day went on around her, and the ground beneath the city breathed its slow and urgent breath, and she read. The man who knew about Foster Wells was a cartographer named Dorian, and he was 74 years old and not well, and he had been living in a room at the back of the geographer's archives for so long that the other archivists had stopped thinking of him as a visitor and had begun thinking of him as a fixture, like the large cabinet in the corner or the crack in the south-facing wall. He came to Aldrich's map room in the late afternoon, walking with a cane, and the determined gait of someone who walked with a cane, not because the cane helped much, but because it gave him something to be impatient at. He looked at Mira, and then at the ledger on the table, and sat down without being invited. "I haven't seen that in 40 years, he said, about the ledger. "You know it?" Mira said. "I know what it is," he said. "Foster Wells was my grandfather's teacher. My grandfather kept the North Well account for 20 years before I did." He looked up at her. "I kept it until I couldn't anymore." "You're the last entry," she said. 80 years ago. One word. Changed." He looked at his hands. "The well changed," he said. "The rhythm changed. I had been going there every season for years, checking the pulse the way my grandfather taught me. He didn't call it a pulse, he called it the breath, which I think is more accurate. And for all those years it had been slow and even, and I had been noting it. Still. Not good, not gone, but still. And then one season I went, and it was not still. It was moving wrong. Too fast and then too slow, and something underneath it that was new, something I had not felt before." He looked at the ceiling. "I wrote changed because I did not have words for what it was, and I went back to the city, and I went to the king." "Which king?" Aldrich said. "The current king's grandfather," Dorian said, "who did not believe me, who told me I was an old man, imagining things about a dry well." He said this without anger. The anger had clearly happened a long time ago, and he had moved past it to the dry, flat landscape on the other side. "I went back to the well myself every year for 10 years after that. The breath kept changing, getting worse." He paused. "Then I stopped being able to make the journey. My knees." He gestured at the cane. "And I had found no one who could do anything with what I knew." "What do you know?" Mira said. He looked at her directly. He had the kind of eyes that very old people sometimes had. Not sharp, but very clear, as though a long life had clarified them down to their essential quality, removed everything that was not fundamental. "I know that my grandfather's teacher's teacher was not a geographer," he said. "I know that Foster Wells learned what the well was from a woman whose name does not appear in any of the records because she asked not to be recorded. And I know that the account of the North Well was maintained for," he stopped, counting, "approximately 400 years, by a chain of people who could not do what needed to be done, but who understood enough to keep watching." He looked at Mira's ears. "We were watchers. We could feel the edge of it. We could not touch the center." "What is the center?" Mira said. "The source," he said. "The original seat of the unrest. My grandfather described it as a knot, a place in the deep ground, where something very old tied itself up, and has been unable to untie since. The pulse you feel is the thing trying to free itself. Every cycle of acceleration is a more determined attempt." "And when it frees itself?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather said his teacher described it this way," he said. "Imagine a river held behind a dam for long enough that the dam has become the landscape. Everyone builds around the dam, Everyone's roads and fields and houses are oriented to the dam, as though it has always been there, and then one day the dam breaks. He folded his hands. Not a flood. Not a manageable flood. The river becomes what it was before the dam, which is something these territories were not built to contain. The room was quiet. The wolf-blooded people, Mira said. They don't break the dam, and they don't reinforce it. They maintain the knot, Dorian said. They are the only things that can reach deep enough to touch it. They hold it at the level of tension, where it does not break, but it does not tighten further. He looked at her. You know this, I think. You felt it this morning. She had not told him about the morning. She looked at Aldrich. I told him, Aldrich said, before he came up. She looked back at Dorian. I felt something at the well, a pulse, and I held it, briefly. It slowed. Yes, Dorian said. That is the right word for it, holding. Not fighting, not dispelling. Holding the knot at the correct tension. He leaned forward slightly. But one person is not enough. The historical record, the parts of it that survived, suggests the effort requires a distributed network. Multiple individuals, positioned at intervals, holding simultaneously. 42, Aldrich said. That's the number from the last documented defense. 42, Dorian agreed. And the last defense was 3 weeks of continuous holding. In shifts, I think. The records are incomplete on the mechanics. He looked between them. How many do you have? 13, Mira said. Dorian was quiet. And the window, Mira said. How long? He looked at her steadily. Based on what my grandfather described of the last acceleration cycle, and what I observed before my knees failed me, he paused. I think you have somewhere between 6 weeks and 3 months. That's a very large range, Aldrich said. Yes, Dorian said. Because I am a cartographer who can feel the edges of something I cannot see the center of. You, he looked at Mira, can see the center. You are better placed than I am to narrow the estimate. She thought about what she had felt at the well. The rhythm, the stumble, the way the pulse had come back faster after the hesitation. 6 weeks is closer, she said. She said it before she was fully decided, and then found, once it was said, that she was decided. Maybe 8, but not 3 months. Nobody challenged this. That evening, the king called a meeting in the large room with the high windows. All 13 of them, plus Aldrich, plus 2 of the king's senior advisors, men who had been present at the initial planning, and who had the look of people accustomed to managing large problems, and not visibly confident about this particular one. The king laid it out plainly. 13 people, approximately 6 to 8 weeks, a target number of 42, the gap between what they had and what they needed. There are more, Aldrich said. I have locations on 11. I need time and personnel to reach them. You have both, the king said, starting tomorrow. The 11 may not all agree to come, Aldrich said. We make the same offer we made here, the king said. No coercion, a choice, the same true information about the situation. He paused. People tend to make reasonable decisions when they're given the truth. Not always, one of the advisors said. No, the king agreed. But the ones who refuse after being told the truth, those are people whose refusal we have to respect. We cannot do this by force and have it work. The holding requires willingness. That's in every account we have. Mira had not known this. She looked at Aldrich, who nodded slightly. Why? Clara asked. She was sitting forward in her chair, her red ears angled slightly toward the king. Because the holding is not a mechanical action, the king said. It's not like lifting a heavy object, where you can compel a body to do it. The records describe it as, he looked at the page in front of him, an act of intent, extended through sensation. You can feel the knot. You can hold it, but only if you are choosing to be there. That makes sense, Harold said, from across the circle, and everyone looked at him. He looked at his hands. You can make someone stand at a machine. You can't make them tend it. There's a difference. The room took this in. So, Clara said, we need 29 more people who will choose to be there, in 6 to 8 weeks. 29 more who agree to come, Aldrich said, plus the 11 I know about, who may or may not agree. Then we'd better be persuasive, Clara said. Nora, from the far edge of the circle, spoke for the first time in the meeting. She had been sitting with her parcel on her knee, as she always sat, her face quietly attentive. What do we tell them? she said. "The people Aldrich is going to find. What is the argument for coming?" The room was quiet. Mira found herself speaking before she had decided to. "The truth," she said. "The same truth we were told." She looked around the circle. "Most of us have been hiding our whole lives. Most of us have been in rooms and professions and disguises that were not built for us. Most of us were told, explicitly or by the pattern of the world, that what we are is a problem to be managed." She paused. "The truth is that what we are is not a problem. It is a specific capability that the territory needs and that no one else can provide. That's different." She held the thought for a moment. "It doesn't erase what was done. It doesn't make the history simple, but it is a different story to live in. And people who have been living in the wrong story for years." She looked at Harold, at Clara, at Nora, at Owen, who was very still in his chair. "I think they can recognize the shape of a different one when it's offered honestly." Nobody moved in the room. Then Owen, sitting beside Pete, said in his small, careful voice, "That's what I would have wanted someone to tell me." The meeting continued for another hour, and then broke. Aldrich left immediately to begin preparations for departure in the morning. The advisors stayed to plan logistics. The 13 began dispersing to their rooms. Mira stayed behind, not because she had been asked to, because the room had grown quieter, and the fire was still going, and she needed a moment without anyone's attention on her. She sat in the empty room after everyone had gone, and she looked at the fire, and she thought about what she had said. That it was a different story to live in. She had not planned to say it. It had come from somewhere she did not have full access to yet, from the part of her that had read her mother's letter 3 times, and still had not found where it landed cleanly. She was living in a different story now. She had walked out of one story, the story of the monastery, the double cloth, the stone shepherd with his open hands, and she had not yet arrived fully in the next one. She was somewhere in between, still learning the language of it, still mapping the corridors. She breathed in, breathed out. She was going to need to write a letter, to the monastery, to her mother, who had written, "When you are ready, I am coming." Mira needed to write back and tell her, "Come now. Not when you think I'm ready. Come now and let me see your face in daylight." She had 11 years of daylight to make up for. She got up from the chair and left the room. In the corridor, she passed Pete, who nodded at her. Past the door of the sleeping quarters, where she could hear Owen's light, fast sleep. Past the stairs to the records room, where the thin ledger sat on the table with the word changed on its last page. She went to the compound's small writing room, a narrow space off the main corridor, used for correspondence, and sat at the desk and lit the lamp and took a page and a pen. She sat for a moment with the pen over the page. Then she wrote, "Mother, come now. I have read your letter, and I am not ready, and you should come anyway. There is work, and we need you. I need you. Not when you think the moment is right. The moment is now." She looked at what she had written. It was not elegant. It was not carefully composed. It was the truest thing she had written in 11 years, possibly in her life, and it was 3 sentences long. She signed it, Mira. Not Sister Mira, not the name she had been in the monastery, just Mira, which was the name she had been given by the woman she was writing to, on a morning she did not remember, in a life that was now in the process of becoming legible from the other side. She folded the letter and sealed it, and wrote the monastery's direction on the outside, and she went and gave it to the compound's night messenger, with instructions to send it first thing in the morning. Then she went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the compound and the city. The city's night sounds were different from its day sounds, lower, slower, more individual. She could hear, from 4 streets away, a cart being unloaded in the small hours. From somewhere to the west, a dog that had decided it had something to say. The guard rotation at the compound gates, every 2 hours exactly. She lay and listened, and felt the ground beneath the building. Faint, at this distance from the north well, but she could feel it. Now that she had felt it once, she could find it, the way you can find a sound in a busy room once you know what you are listening for. The pulse, far below, slow and wrong. She pressed her hand flat against the stone floor beside her bed. Not now, not ready, but soon. She breathed in and let the sound of the city hold her, and she slept, and she did not dream of the monastery, or the valley, or the carved shepherd, or the gate closing. She dreamed of the north well, the ring of old stones, the orange morning light on them, She dreamed of the hollow where the well sat, and in the dream it was not empty but full. Not of water but of sound. A low sustained note that she could feel in her hand and her chest and her bones. And in the dream there were hands beside her hand on the rim of the well. Many hands. And the note was something they were all making together, and it was holding. It was holding. She woke when the first gray light came through the window. She lay still for a moment, feeling the dream behind her. Then she got up and dressed, and without reaching for the cloth on the bedside table, she went downstairs. The day was beginning. In the courtyard below, Aldrich was already loading saddlebags onto horses, preparing for the 11 people he was going to go and find. Owen was helping Pete with something near the stables, his voice carrying clear and light in the cold morning air. Clara appeared beside Mira at the courtyard window. She had a cup of something hot, and she held it with both hands, and looked down at the preparations. "He's going fast," Clara said, about Aldrich. "He has to," Mira said. Clara looked at her. "You're different this morning." "Yes," Mira said. "Good different?" Mira looked at the courtyard. Aldrich was checking a harness with the focused efficiency of someone who had packed for urgent travel many times before. Owen was asking Pete something and Pete was answering, and the boy's face, catching the morning light, was interested and alive and present in a way it had not been on the first day. "I think so," she said. Clara handed her the cup of something hot. "Share," she said. Mira took it. It was tea, slightly overbrewed, warm in her hands. "I sent my mother a letter," she said. Clara raised her eyebrows. "I told her to come now," Mira said. "Not when it's convenient, now." Clara looked at her for a moment with those direct, clear eyes, then she nodded. "Good," she said simply. Below them in the courtyard, Aldrich swung up onto his horse. The compound gate opened. He rode through it without looking back, and behind him 2 other riders followed, and then the gate closed, and the courtyard was quieter and smaller. 6 weeks, maybe 8. 29 more people. 1 mother, on her way. Mira stood at the window with her hands wrapped around the cup of slightly bitter tea, and felt the ground far below the building doing what it was doing, and she breathed, and she held herself still, not in the old way, not the performed stillness, the manufactured calm, but in the real way, the way Agnes had been talking about, all those years ago, in the chapel, with the torn cloth between them. Not effort, something heavier and more permanent. Not peace, not yet, but the ground under peace. She drank the tea. Beside her, Clara was quiet. Below the window, the city moved. The day had begun. Her mother arrived on a Thursday, 4 days after the letter was sent, which meant she had been on the road before the letter arrived. She had already been coming. Mira was in the records room when the compound gate opened, and she heard the horse in the courtyard below, and something in her chest recognized the weight of the footsteps before she had any rational reason to. She set down the ledger she had been reading and stood. She walked down the stairs to the courtyard at a normal pace. She did not run. She had decided she would not run. Not from some determined control, but because she was aware that after 11 years of one thing and 4 days of this new thing, running toward what waited in the courtyard might be the moment that undid her, and she needed to arrive still assembled. She came through the courtyard door. Her mother was standing beside a dark horse, giving the reins to a groom, talking in a low voice to Aldrich, who had returned from his first collection run 2 days ago, with 3 more people, and who now stood at his customary careful distance from the conversation, listening. Ilara was 51 years old. She was tall, which Mira had never fully registered in the monastery, because height in an abbey became invisible. Everyone in the same clothes, everyone at the same height relative to the same furniture. Standing in an open courtyard in traveling clothes rather than a habit, she was tall in a way that was simply a fact about her. She had gray-streaked dark hair, worn back for travel, and the careful posture of someone who had been managing their body language deliberately for years, and had not quite stopped. She turned when Mira came through the door. They looked at each other. There was a moment, Mira counted it afterward, without meaning to, 6 seconds, in which neither of them moved, and neither of them spoke. 6 seconds of looking, the way you look at something you have been trying to see clearly for a very long time, and have now, finally, in good light, in the right position, at the right distance, been able to see. Mira noticed her mother's hands, hanging at her sides. They were still. She recognized the stillness. She had learned it. Then she crossed the courtyard, and her mother's arms came up, and for the first time in 11 years she was being held by the person who had made her, who had handed her away, and watched over her, and sent howling from a valley, and written carefully, and waited. And the grief that Mira had been carrying since she was 4 years old, the specific, particular grief of the gate closing, moved through her like a wave through stone, slow, total, and then, slowly, passed. She did not cry, she breathed. She pressed her face against her mother's shoulder, and breathed, and felt the warmth that she remembered, the particular warmth of her mother's hands, which were warm even on cold days. She had remembered this, she had remembered it correctly, and the correctness of the memory was its own kind of relief. They stood like that in the courtyard for a long time. Aldrich was somewhere else. The groom had taken the horse. The compound moved around them and left them alone. Eventually her mother said, into her hair, "You took the cloth off." "Yes," Mira said. A pause. "How does it feel?" "Cold," Mira said. "And right." Her mother made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite anything else. "Yes," she said. "I imagine so." They separated, and stood apart and looked at each other in the new light. "You look like yourself," her mother said. "I don't know what that means," Mira said. "I don't know what I look like." "You look like me," her mother said. "When I was your age. Before I learned to make my face do nothing." She looked at Mira steadily. "You never quite learned that. You learned the performance of it, but underneath your face was always doing things." She paused. "I loved that about you. It frightened me, but I loved it." Mira looked at her. The familiar face, gray eyes, sharp bones, the particular quality of stillness, reframed now, seen from the other side of the knowledge. Not the abbess, her mother. "I have questions," Mira said. "I know," her mother said. "I will answer all of them. Not today." "Yes, today," Mira said. "Not all of them, but today. We don't have enough time for when we feel ready." Her mother looked at her for a moment, then something in her face changed. Something that had been held for a long time released. Not dramatically, just the way a breath releases when someone finally stops trying to control it. "All right," she said. "Today." They went to the small room that Mira had claimed as something like an office in the records building. A table, 2 chairs, the window with the winter light coming through it. Clara had at some point placed a small bunch of dried herbs from somewhere on the windowsill, in a cup with no water, because they did not need water. They sat down on opposite sides of the table. "Why a monastery?" Mira asked. "Because it was the furthest thing from what we were," her mother said. "Your father's people, my clan, were mountain people. We were loud and direct, and we ran at problems rather than away from them. A monastery is not that. It was the last place anyone would look for us." She paused. "And because Sister Constance was my mother's closest friend, she knew what I was. She had known for 30 years. She was the most trustworthy person I had access to. And then she died," Mira said. "And you took her place." 7 years after I brought you in. Yes." She looked at her hands. "I had been there all 7 years, working in the kitchen, then the scriptorium, building a history, a record of presence that made the assumption of the abbess's role, when Constance died, simply a natural next step." She paused. "I was very careful." "You were the most careful person I have ever met," Mira said. "I just didn't know why." Her mother looked at her. "The hardest part," she said, "was not telling you. I could manage everything else. The identity, the work, the years of watching. But there were mornings." She stopped. "There was a morning when you were about 9, and you had burned your hand on the kitchen fire, and you were trying very hard not to cry, and you were so much yourself in that moment, that I nearly—" She stopped again. "I wanted to tell you. Every day, I wanted to tell you. I didn't know how to weigh what it would cost you to know against what it was costing you not to know." "You were wrong," Mira said quietly. "You should have told me earlier." "Yes," her mother said. "I think so too. Now." They sat with this. "The clan," Mira said. "The others, who survived." Her mother's face changed slightly. The stillness took on a different quality. Not the performed stillness, but the kind that precedes something heavy being set down. "Not many," she said. A few families, scattered. Some went east, which is beyond the reach of the purge. Some did what I did. She looked at the window. Aldrich's family was from our clan. He was, your second cousin. He is how I found him, 3 years ago, when the king reached out. She paused. He came and found me first. The king gave him my location, as part of the first gathering, because someone had reported a monastery abbess behaving strangely around the full moon. Mira looked at her. Who reported it? Her mother made a small, dry sound. Sister Pauline. Mira thought of Pauline in the courtyard after the laundry, looking at the lines and saying, I heard something from the valley. Pauline, who had been watching her for years with that careful, sideways attention. She suspected me, Mira said. She suspected both of us, her mother said. She had been writing to a contact in the capital for 2 years before Aldrich arrived. She was not trying to expose us. She was trying to get us found by the right people. She paused. She is coming here. She sent word yesterday. Mira absorbed this. Pauline, with her folded hands and her indirect speech, and her thin, careful smile. 2 years of letters. Agnes knew, Mira said. It was not a question. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Agnes is very old, she said. She has known many things for a very long time. She keeps them in the way she keeps everything. Not hidden, exactly. Just very quiet. She paused. She told me, when I first arrived, that she could hear the difference between a person who was at peace and a person who was performing it. She said she would not say anything, because what I was performing was love. She stopped. Those were her words. The room was quiet. Mira thought of Agnes's hand on her cheek in the corridor. The light, dry touch of it. You always moved wrong for this place. I need to talk to the king, her mother said. And I need to understand what you've learned in the records. And I need to know how many we have, and what the timing looks like. She straightened in her chair. The posture shift of someone moving from one mode to another, from personal to operational. Tell me what you know, Mira told her. Everything she had read in the records, everything Dorian had explained. The trip to the well, the feel of the pulse, the number 42, the 6 to 8 weeks. Her mother listened without interrupting, her gray eyes on Mira's face, her hands flat on the table. When Mira was done, her mother was quiet for a moment. The well, she said. I know the well. My grandmother took me there once. I was very small, younger than you were when I brought you to the monastery. She put my hand on the rim and she said, This is what we are for. Mira looked at her. She didn't explain it more than that, her mother said. She said, This is what we are for. And then we went home. She looked at the window. I didn't understand it until years later. I don't think I was supposed to understand it. I think she just wanted me to have felt it once, so that it was in my body, and not just in words. She was right to do that, Mira said. Yes, her mother agreed. She was quiet for a moment. How many do we have now? 16, Mira said. Aldrich went out twice. 3 came back with him from the east counties. 2 more arrived yesterday from the river towns. And the target is 42. Yes. And the window is 6 to 8 weeks. More like 6, Mira said. I've been going to the well every morning. The rhythm is faster than it was last week. She held her mother's gaze. Aldrich is going out again tomorrow. And I think we need to look beyond this region. I know people in the northern territories, her mother said. I can write today. Some of them will come. How many? Her mother thought for a moment. 5, possibly 7. That's still not 42, Mira said. No, her mother said, it's not. She looked at the table. But between Aldrich's next run, and my letters, and the people who are already telling others, word spreads. It has always spread. We have always had our own ways of finding each other. She paused. What we need is for the ones who are already here to be ready before the ones who are still coming arrive. We need you all trained. Not trained, Mira said. We don't train for this. You said it yourself. Your grandmother didn't train you. She took you to the well and showed you. It's in the body. It has to come from the body. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. You've thought about this. I've had time, Mira said. What do you think we need? Practice, Mira said. Not training. The difference between training and practice is that practice is what you do when you already know, underneath, how to do something. It's bringing the body into alignment with what it already carries. She looked at her mother. Take everyone to the well. Not in a group, not as a lesson. One by one, or in pairs. Let each person put their hands on the rim and feel it. That's all. The body does the rest. Her mother was quiet for a moment. You are your grandmother's granddaughter, she said softly. I never met her, Mira said. No, her mother said. But you apparently got everything she had anyway. They sat for another moment in the small room, with the winter light coming through the window, and the dried herbs on the sill that did not need water. Then her mother stood, and Mira stood, and they went downstairs together, to find the king, and begin the work. In the following days, the compound changed. It had been a holding place, a waiting place. 16 people learning the rhythms of shared meals, and shared records, and the particular social negotiation of people thrown together by circumstance. Now it became something that had a direction. Her mother went to the well with Owen first, because Mira asked her to. She took the boy on a cold morning, and they were gone for 2 hours, and when they came back, Owen was very quiet, in the particular way that was not distress but absorption, a person receiving something they had not expected to receive, and processing it at a speed that had to be respected. Pete, who had been waiting in the courtyard, looked at the boy, and did not ask what had happened. He simply fell in beside him, and they went inside together. And Mira was grateful for Pete, in a way she had not expected to be grateful for a soldier. Harold went to the well on the second day, and came back with the expression of a man who had been given the technical specifications of something he had been trying to build by instinct for years. He went directly to the records room, and did not come out until late evening. Nora went on the 4th day. She was gone for 3 hours. When she came back, she was alone. Mira's mother had left her there, and come back, and said quietly to Mira, "She needs time. Let her have time." Mira waited. The afternoon passed. The sun went down. The compound lit its lamps. Nora came in through the courtyard gate just as the dinner bell rang, her coat dusty from the track, her face holding the expression Mira had not been able to read before, and could now, because she knew the shape of it from having worn it herself. Not grief. The thing on the other side of grief. The place where grief has been so fully inhabited that it has become part of the structure, rather than a weather event. She sat down at the dinner table with the parcel on her knee, the way she always sat. After a moment she said, "To the table, to no one in particular. I'm staying. I know I said that already, in the circle, but I wanted to say it again with more ground under it." Clara looked at her across the table. "It counts both times," she said. Nora picked up her fork. "Good," she said. The dinner was ordinary after that. People passed food and spoke about the next morning's trip to the well, and Harold explained something about the rhythm intervals from the old records to 2 people who had not read the ledger yet. Owen laughed at something Pete said, which was the first time Mira had heard him laugh, and the sound of it was sudden and high and exactly the right weight for the room. Mira sat at the table and ate her food and listened. 22 people now. The rooms upstairs were full. Someone had arranged pallets in the records room for the overflow. The kitchens were working at full capacity. 3 weeks had passed since she came through the compound gate for the first time. 3 weeks since the first meeting with the king, in his plain room, with the window over the bare tree. The tree, she noticed when she looked out the next morning, had small new buds on its lowest branch. Winter still, but not entirely. 22. The target was 42. The well's pulse, which she checked each morning with her hands on the cold stone rim, was faster than the week before. Faster, but still holdable. She breathed. Still holdable. The 37th person arrived on a Wednesday morning, 17 days before Mira's estimate ran out. He was a man called George, 60 years old, who had been a stonemason for 35 years, and had spent those years working with his hands inside buildings that were, not coincidentally, always adjacent to deep foundations. He had not known, consciously, that he had been drawn to foundations. He told this to Clara over breakfast on his first morning in the compound, with the tone of a man describing something that should have been obvious and had not been. Clara listened and said, "Yes, I was drawn to water, rivers, streams, the sound of moving water. I told myself I just liked the noise." George looked at her. "Did you know what it was?" "Not until the well," she said. "But after the well, Everything made sense backward. Mira, sitting across the table, listened to this exchange and thought about how this was true of all of them. The mason drawn to foundations. The girl drawn to water. The mill worker, Harold, who had chosen the noisiest possible work environment and spent 9 years with the floor vibrating under his feet. Owen, who had apparently spent his 11 years gravitating toward the lowest point in any building he entered, and sitting there, which everyone had put down to shyness. She had spent 11 years pressing her hands into soil, kneeling in gardens, choosing the coldest room in the monastery, because the cold stone floor against her knees felt like something. They had all been doing it, without knowing they were doing it, their bodies pointing at the thing their minds were not allowed to know. She thought about this as she walked to the well that morning. The track north of the city had become familiar to her over the past weeks, the way the road changed surface as it left the cobblestones for the packed earth of the fields, the particular smell of the river to her right, the hollow in the landscape where the ring of stones waited. She went alone in the mornings now. The group practices, which she would not call practices, but which were what they were, happened in the afternoons, 3 or 4 people at a time, her mother usually present, sometimes herself. In the mornings she went alone, before the compound woke, to take the measure of the day. She put her hands on the rim. The rhythm was fast. Faster than yesterday. Not emergency fast, not the critical breaking point that Dorian had described, and that she had been watching for, but fast, in the way a fire burns fast before it has fully caught, the way something is doing what it is about to do, more than it is doing what it has been doing. She held the rim for 15 minutes. Pushed, steadily, not with force but with the particular sustained intention she had learned over weeks of morning visits. The rhythm eased slightly, not as much as it had eased 3 weeks ago with the same effort. The knot was getting harder to hold. She walked back to the city faster than usual. She found her mother in the records room, already at work, a cup of cold tea beside her, and Dorian's ledger open in front of her. Alara looked up when Mira came through the door, and she read Mira's face the way she had always read it, from 11 years of practice at looking at the person under the performance. Faster, her mother said. Yes, Mira said. I think we have less than 2 weeks, maybe 10 days. Her mother was quiet for a moment, then she said, we have 37. We need 42, Mira said. I know, she looked at the ledger. Aldrich is in the eastern counties. He has 4 people with him. He'll be back in 4 days. 37 plus 4 was 41. 1 short, and Aldrich was 4 days away, and the window was 10 days or less. 41 might have to be enough. She said this to her mother, who looked at the numbers on the page in front of her, and then at Mira, and then said, it might have to be. Dorian says 42, Mira said. Dorian says the historical record suggests 42, her mother said. The historical record is incomplete. The last defense used 42 and it worked. So 42 is the number we know about. We don't know that 38 is not enough, or 39. She paused. We don't know that 41 isn't enough. Mira looked at the wall. She had been doing a calculation in her head since the well. The same calculation she had been doing every morning. Rerunning the numbers. Trying to find a way to close the gap. Clara said Pauline is coming. Pauline is coming, her mother confirmed. She should arrive the day after tomorrow. That's 38. Yes. And then Aldrich with 4. 42, her mother said, if they all arrive in time. If the window is actually 10 days rather than 8. Mira breathed. We don't have time to wait and see, she said. We need to go to the well now, all of us, in force. Not to do the full defense, just to push the rhythm back. Buy time. Her mother looked at her. Now, she said. This afternoon, Mira said. All 37. Together. Not at the well itself. It won't hold us all at the rim. But near it. Distributed. Hands on the ground. Her mother was quiet for a moment. The records don't mention this. The records are incomplete, Mira said, using her mother's words back at her. And Dorian's grandfather's teacher's knowledge was in the bones, not the words. Sometimes you have to make a decision that the written record has not provided for. Her mother looked at her for a long moment, the gray eyes, steady, measuring. Then she said, I'll go find the king. The afternoon was cold and clear, the sky, the specific winter blue that had appeared more often in the past week. as the season began to think about changing its mind. 37 people walked north from the compound, in a loose, unformed procession that would not have been identifiable as anything in particular to the people they passed on the road, except perhaps as a large group from the same household going somewhere together. They did not go with instruction. Mira had said, simply, "Come. We're going to the well. We're going to put our hands on the ground and hold. You know how to do this. You've all been to the well. Your bodies know." The king had sent Pete and 2 other soldiers as escort. Pete walked beside Owen, the way he always walked beside Owen. The hollow opened before them, the ring of old stones, the dark mouth of the well. Mira went to the rim. She put her hands on it and felt the pulse. Very fast now. The wrong fast that the ledger had called changed. The rhythm of something trying to free itself with increasing urgency. She turned to the group. 37 people in the cold afternoon light, standing in the hollow, and on the track, and on the edge of the field above, their breath visible in the air. "Spread out," she said. "As far as you can, while staying close enough to feel connected to the others. Hands on the ground, that's all." They spread. Some went into the field, kneeling in the winter bare earth. Some stayed on the track. Harold went to one of the old stones of the ring, and pressed both palms flat against it. Clara went to the slope of the hollow and sat down, and put her hands behind her, palms down. Nora put one knee on the ground, and her free hand on the earth, and kept the other hand on her parcel, and Mira looked at her for a moment and thought, "Good. Whatever gets you to the ground, use it." Her mother knelt beside the well. Owen and Pete were on the track, Owen with both hands flat, Pete standing respectfully to the side, not putting his own hands down, because he knew this was not his to do but staying, because Owen needed him to stay. Mira put her hands on the rim and closed her eyes. The pulse came into her through the stone, fast, wrong fast, a rhythm trying to accelerate through its own pattern, faster and faster, the stumble between beats becoming shorter. She felt it come into her palms, up her arms, into her chest. She pushed. Around her, she felt, not heard, not saw, felt in the way you feel the weight of someone sitting down beside you in a dark room, the others doing the same, one by one, then in groups, then all at once. A shift in the quality of the air around her. A gathering that had nothing to do with bodies, in a hollow, but everything to do with what the bodies were doing, and what the ground was doing in response. It was not like anything she had a comparison for. The closest she could get was the sound of many people breathing together, not synchronized, not planned, but convergent, the way breathing naturally aligns when people are together, in a calm place doing nothing. A convergence that added without calculation. The pulse, beneath her hands, slowed. Slowly. Then more. Then more. The wrong fast becoming wrong fast but slower. And then simply slow. The knot tightening back into the correct tension, the way a rope tightens when you apply the right steady pull. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. With the gradual certainty of a physical process being reversed by the exact right force. She held it. They held it. She did not know how long they were there. The afternoon light shifted while her eyes were closed, moved from the specific angle that was mid-afternoon to the lower, warmer angle that was late afternoon. The cold came up through her hands from the stone, and she was aware of it, but did not feel it the way she usually felt cold. It was there, acknowledged, and not relevant, in the way most things were not relevant when you were paying full attention to something else. The pulse stabilized, not stopped, not fixed. The knot did not untie itself, and she had not expected it to, but it settled into the correct tension, the slow, even rhythm that Dorian's grandfather had learned to call still, the rhythm that said, "Not today." She opened her eyes. Around her, people were beginning to sit back on their heels, to take their hands from the ground, to look at each other with the slightly dazed expression of people returning from a place that does not have a name yet. Harold was the last to move, and when he did, he sat back on his knees and put his face in his big hands for a moment, and then brought his hands down and looked at the sky. Owen was leaning against Pete, who had a hand on his shoulder. Nora was still kneeling, her hand on the earth, looking at the well. Clara caught Mira's eye from across the hollow and held it for a moment, and in her expression was the specific quality that Mira had felt inside herself in the last minutes. Not triumph, not relief, not even satisfaction. Something quieter and more essential than those things. The recognition of what you were built for, confirmed. Her mother came to her and stood beside her at the well's rim. She looked down into the dry stone shaft. "Well," she said, quietly. She did not mean the water source. "Yes," Mira said. "We bought time," her mother said. "Yes. For Aldrich." "For Aldrich," Mira agreed. They stood there. The hollow was quiet. The field beyond it was still. Somewhere in the distant city, a bell rang the hour, its sound carrying clean and precise in the cold air. Aldrich arrived 6 days later, not 4, because the road had flooded in the eastern counties and added 2 days to the return journey. He arrived with 3 people, not 4. One had refused, which they had accepted, and which Aldrich told Mira about, with a factual brevity that told her he had sat with the decision for a long time, before being factual about it. 3, which made 40, not 42. And Pauline had arrived 2 days before Aldrich, on a cold gray morning, travel-worn, and without apology, and with the particular directness that Mira was now seeing in her, as something she had always had, but had always said sideways. Pauline looked at Mira's ears and said, "I knew for 6 years. I told myself it was not my business, and then I decided it was everyone's business, and wrote to a contact I had found." She paused. "I hope that was right." "It was right," Mira said. "Good," Pauline said, and went inside to find the records room. 41. The well's rhythm, 5 days after the group holding, had begun to accelerate again, more slowly than before. The mass holding had bought time but not permanent change. That, Dorian had told them, was not how it worked. You could not quiet it permanently with a single effort. The permanent tending was exactly what the Covenant had described, a sustained, distributed, rotating attention. Not a battle, a maintenance. The old Foster Wells maintenance accounts, which had been the visible record of an invisible practice for 4 centuries, had not been the history of a crisis. They had been the history of a routine. That was what they were being asked to rebuild. 41 people. 4 short, Dorian still maintained. But Dorian's estimate was based on incomplete records, and the group holding had worked, and Mira had spent 5 weeks learning what her body had always known, and what the history had spent 400 years pointing at. She did not know that 41 was enough. She did not know that it was not. The morning Aldrich returned, she went to the well alone, as she always did, and she put her hands on the rim, and she held the pulse, and she thought about enough. About what enough meant. About the difference between the number the records specified and the number you actually had. She thought about the monastery, where 11 years of performing stillness had been enough to keep her safe, even though it was not stillness. She thought about her mother, whose years of performing a different self had been enough to protect them both, even though it was not who she was. She thought about Nora, with her hand on the parcel in the dark, which was enough to get her through the night, even though it was not healing. Enough was not the number. Enough was what you brought to the number you had. She held the pulse, and she breathed, and she felt the ground beneath her pushing back at her in its slow, ancient way, the way it had been pushing back for longer than anyone alive had been alive, and she pushed in return. The afternoon the decision was made to go to the well with 41 and do what could be done. The sky was the same pale winter blue it had been on the day they first went as a group. The bare tree in the compound courtyard, which had developed small green buds and then lost them to a late frost, and then, stubbornly, developed them again, was a small but specific shade of green at its tips. Not spring yet, the direction of spring. They walked north in the same loose procession, 41 people and 3 soldiers and Pete, and the city noticed them no more than it had the first time, because the city was large and had its own things to think about. In the hollow, with the ring of old stones, they spread out the way they had learned to spread. Farther than before, because there were more of them. Some went to the field on the far side of the hollow, which Mira had not expected, but which felt right as she watched it. The distribution widening, the network growing to fit what was available. Her mother knelt at the well's rim. Mira stood. She looked at the 41 people around her, in the hollow and the field and along the track. Harold, his palms already flat on one of the old stones. Clara, in the field, sitting cross-legged, her red ears angled down. Owen, with both hands on the ground, and Pete standing at his back, not touching, just there. Nora on one knee, parcel set aside, both hands free and both hands down. Pauline, at the far edge of the group, her folded hands now unfolded, flat on the winter earth, with the practical directness of someone who, once they had decided something, did not revisit it. Aldrich, at the opposite side of the hollow from Mira, standing with his hands pressed against the rough bark of the single tree that grew at the hollow's edge, looking at her across the distance. She looked back at him. She nodded. He nodded. She knelt and put her hands on the well's rim, and the pulse came into her, and she pushed. Around her, 40 more people did what their bodies knew to do. The knot, deep in the ground, felt it. It resisted. Of course it resisted. It had been building toward freedom for 200 years, and it was not going to give way politely. She felt the resistance come back up through the stone into her hands, and she held it, and the others held it with her. And the pulse, the wrong fast, urgent pulse, pushed, and they pushed back. Time did what it always does when the thing you are doing has no endpoint. It stopped being measurable. The afternoon moved around them. The light changed. The cold deepened. She was aware of these things in the outer layer of her attention, and not in the layer that mattered. Her hands were cold. Her knees were cold. She breathed. She held. The pulse pushed and she held it, and the 40 other people in the hollow, and the field, held it with her, and the resistance did not break, and did not win, and did not break, and did not win. Then, slowly, it eased. Not surrendered, not gone, eased. The way a river eases after a heavy rain, still running, still the same river, but back within its banks, back within the pattern that the banks were built to contain. The rhythm settled. She breathed. She heard, around her, the sound of 40 people breathing, not synchronized, not identical, but together, in the loose and sufficient way of things that do not need to be perfect to work. She opened her eyes. The hollow, the field, the winter sky, darker now, the pale blue going towards dusk. 41 people around her, coming back from wherever the holding had taken them, hands lifting from earth and stone and bark, eyes opening, the particular expression of return on every face. Her mother stood up from the well's rim and came to stand beside her. She said nothing. She put her hand briefly on Mira's shoulder and then moved to check on the others, which was exactly what she would do, and which was right. Aldrich walked across the hollow. He stopped a few feet away, at his customary distance. He looked at the well. "The rhythm?" he said. "Settled," Mira said. "For now." "For how long?" "I don't know." She looked at the old stones. "We'll have to come back, regularly. This is not a one-time thing." "No," he said. "It never was." She looked at him. Her second cousin, who had sent howling from a valley on her mother's instruction, who had stood in a kitchen doorway and given her a choice, who had ridden at the front of a column for 2 days of road and let her find her own way to the destination at the end of it. "Thank you," she said. "For the valley." He was quiet for a moment. "Your mother asked me to." "I know," she said. "Thank you anyway." He nodded once. He turned and walked back to the track, already looking at the road ahead, already thinking about who else to find, where else to go. He would not stop looking. She knew this about him now. She would not stop either. She looked at the well one more time. The ring of old stones, dark in the failing light. The dry shaft going down to the bare stone floor 20 feet below. The place where something very old had been tying and untying itself for longer than anyone alive could account for. The place where she had come to understand what the double wrapping of cloth and the pressed flat sounds and the 11 years of stillness had been a preparation for, without being the preparation. Where she had put her hands on cold stone and felt the world tell her, finally and without qualification, what she was for. Not what she had been made to do, what she had been made to be. She was not the same person who had knelt in the east garden, pressing her fingers into cold soil while the bell rang for vespers. She was, and she turned this over once more, looking at it from all its angles. She was that person continued, unfolded. The same key, now in the right lock. She stood up from the well's rim. She dusted her hands against her habit and turned to face the track that led back to the city, and she walked. Around her, 41 people walked with her. Her mother, to her left, glancing at her once with those gray eyes, and then looking forward. Clara, somewhere in the group, saying something to Harold that made him make a sound that was close to a laugh. Owen's light footsteps, beside Pete's heavier ones. The city waited ahead of them. lit now against the darkening sky, enormous and full of people who did not know that 41 people had just held the ground beneath them. That was fine. That was, she thought, exactly as it should be. The work was not a story that needed witnesses. It was a routine, a maintenance. 400 years of small entries in a thin ledger, a chain of people whose names were or were not preserved, and the simple fact of the ground remaining ground because someone kept coming to hold it. She would come tomorrow morning, alone, before the compound woke. She would put her hands on the cold stone rim and listen, and she would push, and then she would come back. And the day after that, and the day after that. This was what she was for, not the performance of stillness, not the double-wrapped cloth, not the manufactured calm or the swallowed sounds or the prayers for patience. This, hands on stone, ground under her, the pulse of something enormous and old and not hostile, just awake, always a little too awake, needing to be reminded, regularly and gently, that now was not the time. The city drew them in through the gate. The streets were warm with lamplight and evening noise. The compound was ahead. She walked through the city with her ears fully open and the cold evening air on her face, and the ground beneath the cobblestones was quiet, and she breathed, and she kept walking. She had learned what she was. She was going to find out what came next.